Hey everyone, welcome back to Bald Voldemort. Get ready for an amazing tale. What if Harry was raised in Camp Half-Blood and returned to Hogwarts as a demigod king? What if Harry was raised by Aquaman and became the king of the Black Lake at Hogwarts? Smash that like button and subscribe for more. Here we go. Chapter 1. The Boy the Ocean Kept the Night Voldemort came to Godric's Hollow. It rained. Not the polite English drizzle that locals had grown accustomed to, but a proper, ancient rain. The kind that made the gutters overflow and turned garden paths into rivers and convinced even the most stubborn dog owners to leave their pets inside. It came off the Atlantic in waves, pushing inland with a purpose that meteorologists would later struggle to explain, and it soaked the village of Godric's Hollow so thoroughly that every window glowed orange and warm against the dark, every house a little island of light in the wet black night. James Potter died on his feet. Lily Potter died buying her son 30 seconds. These were facts that would be written into history, argued over in hushed voices, taught to children who would grow up believing them to be the whole story. They were not the whole story. The whole story included what happened after the green light, after the roof cracked and the crib tilted, after Voldemort staggered back from the rebounding curse and dissolved into something less than a ghost and more than nothing. The whole story included the lightning bolt scar and the boy beneath it, sitting up in the ruins of his nursery, utterly silent, watching the rain come through the hole in the ceiling with the serious dark eyes of a child who had already, in some deep animal way, registered that something enormous had just happened and was waiting to understand what. The whole story included the ocean answering. 3 miles off the Devon coast, Arthur Curry felt it the way he felt most things, in his chest first, then in his teeth, then in the water around him, which went suddenly and completely still in a way that had nothing to do with weather. He was between errands, which for the King of Atlantis meant he was swimming at approximately 40 knots through waters that belonged to no country and everyone at once, and the stillness stopped him the way a wall would stop anyone else. He surfaced. He looked at the coast. The rain was hitting the ocean like applause. Something the water said in the way water said things, not in words, not quite, but in pressure and current and the collective memory of every drop that had ever touched every living thing. Something that is ours. Arthur Curry had learned, over the course of a life that defied easy summary, not to argue with the ocean. He was on the Devon coast in 4 minutes. Godric's Hollow in 25, moving through drainage channels and then on foot through the rain-soaked lanes, following something he couldn't name but couldn't ignore. He found the cottage without difficulty. It was the one that looked like it had swallowed a grenade, the one with the light still burning in the ground floor window and the roof peeled back like a lid. He went in through the front door, which was hanging open, and he stepped over James Potter in the hallway without knowing who he was, only knowing he was gone, and he took the stairs 2 at a time. Lily Potter was at the threshold of the nursery. He stepped around her carefully, with the reverence of someone who had seen too much death to be casual about it, and he looked into the room. The baby was sitting in the ruins of his crib, soaked through from the rain coming in overhead, watching Arthur with those serious dark eyes. There was a cut on his forehead, fresh, already crusting, shaped like a bolt of lightning, and his hair was doing something that defied gravity and probably physics. He was not crying. He looked, Arthur thought, like someone who had decided to reserve judgment. Arthur crouched down to the baby's level. The water in the room, the rain pooling on the floorboards, the wet plaster dripping from the walls, moved, just slightly, just enough. Tilted toward the child the way iron filings tilt toward a magnet, and Arthur felt what the ocean had felt, closer now and unmistakable. Divine blood, old blood, the blood of the sea itself, so deep in this child's lineage that it had been dormant for generations, waiting for a moment exactly like this one, a moment of crisis, of power, of the walls between ordinary and extraordinary coming down. Well, Arthur said to the baby and to no one in particular, that explains a few things. The baby reached out one small hand and grabbed Arthur's finger. Arthur Curry, King of Atlantis, defeater of Ocean Master, a man who had faced things that would turn most people's hair white and had come out the other side merely weathered, sat down on the wet floor of a destroyed nursery in Godric's Hollow and felt something in his chest do something unexpected. He stayed there until he heard the motorbike. Hagrid came in like a weather event, ducking through the doorway and filling the room immediately, his face crumpled with the specific devastation of someone who had loved a family and arrived too late. He stopped when he saw Arthur. Arthur stood up, the baby settled against his chest with one enormous hand cupped under his head. "Hooray you," Hagrid said, voice rough with grief. Someone who was nearby, Arthur said, "This child, what's his name?" Hagrid's face did something complicated. Harry Potter, I've got orders, Dumbledore's orders, he's to go to his aunt and uncle. I've got a letter and everything. Arthur looked at Harry, who was looking at Hagrid with the same serious, assessing expression he'd been wearing since Arthur arrived. His aunt and uncle. On his mom's side, yeah, he'll be safe there, protected. From what? Hagrid explained in the halting, grief-stricken way of someone telling a story they couldn't quite believe themselves, about Voldemort and the curse and the protection Lily Potter's sacrifice had created. Arthur listened. He was very good at listening. It was one of the things people consistently underestimated about him. The protection is tied to blood, Arthur said when Hagrid finished. That's what Dumbledore said. His mother's blood, her sacrifice. Yeah, Arthur looked at the baby again. Harry had found Arthur's collar and was examining it with scholarly intensity. The protection is in him, Arthur said. The blood, it goes with him wherever he goes. It doesn't require a specific address. Hagrid blinked. I suppose, but Dumbledore said his aunt's house. Dumbledore wasn't here 30 minutes ago when this child moved every drop of water in this room without knowing he was doing it. Arthur said it without heat, without drama. Just a fact stated plainly to a man who deserved honesty. This boy is something more than a wizard, and wherever he goes, he needs to be somewhere he can learn what that means. Hagrid looked at him for a long time. He looked at Harry. He looked at the destroyed room, at Lily Potter in the doorway, at the rain coming through the ceiling. He was, despite everything, a man of deep instinct, and his instinct right now was doing something complicated. Who are you? He said again, different inflection this time. Arthur considered. Someone who can give him what he needs, he said, and someone who will make sure he finds his way back to your world when the time is right. You have my word on that. Hagrid was quiet for a long moment, then he handed over the letter. Harry's first clear memories were water. Not the abstract idea of water, but the specific weight of it, the pressure of the Atlantic at depth, the way sound moved differently when you were surrounded by it on all sides, the colors that existed only below 50 feet that had no names in any surface language. Arthur had spent 6 months conducting what he privately thought of as extensive field testing, taking the baby to progressively deeper and colder water and watching with genuine scientific interest, as Harry not only failed to drown but seemed to find the whole thing extremely relaxing. At 8 months old, Harry slept better in the ocean than anywhere else. At 14 months, he could hold his breath for 6 minutes, which Arthur checked 4 times because he didn't trust the stopwatch. At 2 years old, he walked into the surf at a Cornish beach. Arthur had a surface cottage he used when Atlantean politics required him to be inconspicuous, and sat down in the shallow water and had what appeared to be a conversation with a passing crab. The crab did not leave. It circled him twice and then sat beside him, which was not normal crab behavior, and Harry laughed, which was a sound that Arthur had decided was his favorite sound, and he sat in the surf beside his boy and felt the ocean doing that thing it did around Harry, that settling like it recognized him. Yeah, Arthur said, to no one in particular or possibly to the ocean. Me too. He got help when Harry was 3. Diana first, he trusted her instincts about power and heritage more than almost anyone else's, and she knelt in front of Harry in Arthur's cottage kitchen and looked him in the eyes and said, quietly, "Hello, little one. Do you know who your father is?" Harry said, "Arthur." Diana looked up at Arthur. Arthur shrugged with the expression of someone who didn't see the problem. "Your birth father," Diana said gently. "Fish," Harry said with some confidence. Diana made a sound that was, for Diana, essentially falling over laughing. "Close enough," she said, and then more seriously to Arthur. "He needs training, real training, Chiron." Arthur already knew. He'd been putting it off the way you put off things you know are right but aren't ready for. But Diana was right. Harry was 3 years old and had accidentally drained the bathtub into the hallway twice this week by wanting the water to come to him, and accidentally was the problem word in that sentence. Power without training was a storm with no direction. He started making arrangements. Camp Half-Blood sat on Long Island behind a magical boundary that kept it invisible to mortals and monsters alike, nestled into hills that rolled gently toward a beach that was always, regardless of season, slightly too warm for New York. Harry arrived there at age 5 on a clear September morning, sitting on Arthur's shoulder because he'd decided that was the correct mode of transport, wearing a small orange t-shirt that was already soaked because Harry was always, to some degree, wet. Chiron met them at the property line. He was in his wheelchair, the fake one, the one with the plaid blanket concealing his equine half, and he looked at Harry with the thoughtful assessment of someone who had trained heroes for 3,000 years and could generally identify the nature of a challenge within about 90 seconds. Harry looked back at him. "Son of Poseidon," Chiron said to Arthur. "Almost certainly. Raised in Atlantis, in and around." Chiron looked at Harry again. "Can you swim?" "He can breathe underwater," Arthur said. Chiron's expression shifted into something between professional interest and genuine surprise, which, for Chiron, was equivalent to anyone else's jaw-dropping. "Ah," he said. Harry, who had been conducting his own assessment, pointed at the plaid blanket. "There's a horse under there," he announced. "Yes," Chiron said without missing a beat. There is. Cool, said Harry. Chiron turned to Arthur. Leave him with us, he said. Come back in 6 years. Arthur crouched down to Harry's level, a substantial logistical operation given Arthur's dimensions, and looked his boy in the eye. Harry looked back with those serious dark eyes that had not changed since the nursery in Godric's Hollow, calm and watchful and already so much older than 5. Arthur had a whole speech prepared. He'd been working on it for a week. He said, "Listen to Chiron. Don't eat anything Hermes kids offer you without checking what it is first. And if something scares you, dive toward it," Harry said. Arthur blinked. Those were his words. He'd said them during a shark encounter off Cape Verde when Harry was 4, and apparently they had landed. "Yeah," Arthur said, his voice doing something he was going to attribute to sea spray. "Dive toward it." He stood up. He shook Chiron's hand. He walked back toward the boundary and didn't look back, because if he looked back he would stay, and staying was not what Harry needed. Harry watched him go for exactly 3 seconds. Then he turned to Chiron and said, "Is there a beach?" "There is," Chiron said. "Good," said Harry, and walked into Camp Half-Blood like he owned it, which in a sense involving divine lineage and water rights he arguably did. 6 years at Camp Half-Blood made Harry Potter into something the wizarding world had no framework for. Chiron taught him the old way, Greek, Latin, the history of every war Olympus had ever fought, the names and temperaments of every god and monster, the geography of the underworld as carefully as the geography of Long Island. He learned to read people the way sailors read weather, to identify the shift in someone's posture that meant they were about to draw a weapon, to negotiate with supernatural entities that had been alive long enough to find most humans boring. He trained with Ares kids and learned that aggression without control was just noise. He trained with Athena's kids and learned that strategy without instinct was a map with no territory. He trained with Apollo's kids and learned to read injuries, to shoot, to run in a way that used the ground rather than fighting it. He spent 3 days being tutored by Thalia Grace in what she called the art of the meaningful glare, which he turned out to have a natural gift for. He made friends. Annabeth Chase was 8 when they met, and already the most organized thinker Harry had ever encountered, which, given that he'd been briefed on Atlantean Council procedures by age 4, was saying something. She was Athena's daughter, and she wore that fact like armor, and she looked at Harry on his first full day of combat training and said, very directly, "You're the son of Poseidon. That means you're theoretically the most powerful kid in this camp. But theory is worthless without application, so don't expect me to be impressed until you actually do something." Harry had thought about this for approximately 2 seconds. "Okay," he said, "throw something at me." She threw a practice dagger, which she'd been expecting him to dodge. He reached out his hand and the air went briefly inexplicably damp, and the dagger slowed in its trajectory and dropped at his feet like it had thought better of the whole enterprise. Annabeth looked at the dagger. She looked at Harry. "Okay," she said, "we're going to be friends." They spent the next 6 years being exactly that, the kind of friends who argued constantly, trusted each other completely, and would without hesitation walk into anything for each other. She taught him architecture and tactics. He taught her to love the ocean. They were terrible influences on each other in the best possible way. The Black Sea incident when they were 9 and 10 respectively was technically Annabeth's plan, and technically Harry was just the one who'd flooded the monster's cave, and technically the whole thing had been resolved before any adult knew it was a problem, and they had agreed never to discuss specifics. Chiron knew. Chiron always knew. He said nothing except that he hoped they'd learned something, and they both said yes, and they had, though what they'd learned was primarily that they worked extremely well together and should probably do it more often, which was possibly not the lesson Chiron intended. The years passed in the rhythm of Camp Half-Blood, summers full of training and quests, and the specific social chaos of putting several hundred children of gods in close proximity. School years in a mortal middle school where Harry was technically enrolled under the name Henry Curry, Arthur's idea, and found the academic material so elementary that he spent most of his time in the library reading things the curriculum hadn't reached yet. He was quiet at the mortal school, not from shyness but from the focused stillness of someone who has learned that most rooms don't require your full attention. Teachers found him unsettling in ways they couldn't articulate. Classmates mostly left him alone, reading him correctly as someone who was somewhere else in his head most of the time. He had his mother's eyes. People told him that sometimes in the wizarding world later. He didn't know what to do with it because he had no memory of his mother's eyes, and the sentence always landed with the weight of something important that he didn't have access to. He knew Godric's Hollow. Chiron had told him carefully and fully at age 6 the whole story, Voldemort and the Potters and the night Arthur had found him. He processed it in the way he processed most hard things. He sat with it, turned it over, placed it somewhere internally where it was accessible but not constantly in the way. He felt grief for parents he couldn't remember. He felt no particular fear of Voldemort, which Chiron had noted was either excellent psychological fortitude or the result of having been raised in proximity to things that were actually terrifying, and probably both. He was 11 years old and had wrestled a Scylla with Annabeth as backup on his left and a bronze sword in his right hand when the prophecy came. The oracle at Camp Half-Blood smelled like old scrolls, and the particular thickness of air that meant something was about to become significant. Harry had been there twice before, both times for other people's prophecies, both times finding the atmosphere more theatrical than the content seemed to warrant. He went this time because Chiron asked, and because Harry trusted Chiron with his life, which was the kind of trust built from 6 years of the man showing up for him consistently and without drama. The oracle unspooled in the way oracles always did, green mist, rhyming couplets, the general sensation that something very old was using the room as a speaker. Where salt meets stone and old magic breathes, the Earthshaker's son must cross the seas. A school built on secrets, a lord without form, the king claims his kingdom or the darkness grows warm. One world cracks open for the other to see, what was kept from the ocean sets free. Harry listened to the whole thing twice in his head, parsing it the way Annabeth had taught him. Look for the active verb first, then the subject, then figure out what the prophecy is actually asking you to do versus what it wants you to think it's asking. Active verb, claims, subject, the king, object, his kingdom. He looked at Chiron. Chiron looked at him with the expression of someone who had been expecting this and had still hoped it might not come. A school built on secrets, Harry said. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, Chiron said. Scotland, you have a letter. He produced it. The envelope was thick, creamy, sealed with wax in the shape of a crest Harry didn't recognize. His name was on the front in emerald green ink, Mr. H. Potter, Cabin 3, Camp Half-Blood, Long Island, New York. Harry turned it over. They've known where I was this whole time. The school's tracking charms are thorough, Chiron said, carefully neutral. And Dumbledore, did he know? The pause that followed was very slightly too long. He knew Arthur took you. He disagreed with the decision. Harry thought about this. He thought about a man who had disagreed with the decision and had nonetheless allowed 6 years to pass without acting on that disagreement, and what that said about the man's estimation of his own ability to retrieve Harry from wherever Harry was. He found that quietly amusing. A lord without form, he said. Voldemort. Currently disembodied, believed to be seeking a way to return to physical existence. And the schools where he's going to try, we believe so, yes. Harry nodded slowly. He read the letter. Standard admissions correspondence, course list, supply list, instructions for getting to platform 9 3/4 on September 1st. The kind of document that assumed the recipient was a normal 11-year-old who had not recently been in a knife fight with a classical sea monster. One world cracks open for the other to see, Harry said. They don't know what I am, the wizarding world. They know you as Harry Potter, the boy who lived, Chiron said. They do not, in general, know about demigods. The two worlds have maintained careful separation for some time. Harry absorbed this. He thought about walking into a world that thought it knew who he was, that had built expectations and stories and probably statues around a version of him that had nothing to do with the actual person. He thought about Voldemort moving through the shadows of the school, thinking himself the most dangerous thing in any given room. Something that was not quite a smile moved across his face. It was the expression Annabeth called his tactical face and Thalia called his this is going to be interesting face and Chiron called his I'm slightly worried about what you're planning face all at once. I'll need new clothes, Harry said. Robes, apparently. He looked at the supply list. And an owl. I've arranged for Annabeth to. No, Harry said without heat. Annabeth has her own things, this is mine. He thought for a moment. I'll send her letters. Chiron looked at him for a long moment with the kind of look that a person who had cared for you for 6 years and was about to send you somewhere new looks like. It had components of pride and worry and the specific ache of watching someone who has been partly yours become more fully their own. What are you going to do? Chiron asked. Not how will you handle it or do you have a plan, just the open question, asking Harry to tell him what was in his head. Harry folded the letter and tucked it into his pocket. What the oracle said, he said simply, claim my kingdom. He packed in an hour. He didn't overpack, a habit Arthur had drilled into him early because when you spend significant time underwater, excess weight has immediate consequences. He brought his celestial bronze dagger which could pass for a school regulation penknife in the right light. He brought the coin Arthur had given him years ago, Green, Atlantean, old enough that the face on it was one of Poseidon's earlier avatars, not for currency but for comfort, the weight of it in his palm grounding. He brought 3 books Annabeth had pressed on him in their last training session, with the instruction to read the chapters on ancient magical theory. Harry, I'm serious. It's directly relevant. He said goodbye to the camp in the way he'd learned to say goodbye to things, directly and without excessive ceremony. He hugged Annabeth, who hugged back fiercely and said into his shoulder, "Don't do anything I wouldn't do," which, given Annabeth's record, was basically no restriction at all. He shook Chiron's hand and held it for a moment. "Thank you," he said, and Chiron knew he meant everything. He called Arthur from the camp's one payphone, which was a relic of the 1970s and worked on divine intervention alone. Arthur picked up on the second ring. "I'm going," Harry said. "I know," Arthur said. "Chiron told me. You're not going to tell me to be careful." "You won't be," Arthur said with the complete equanimity of someone who had raised the boy and knew exactly what careful meant in his vocabulary. "Be smart, be fair, don't let anyone put you in a box." "Is that the speech?" "That's the speech. It's shorter than I expected." "You don't need a long speech," Arthur said. "You know what you're doing." Harry held the phone for a moment and listened to the faint sound of the ocean on Arthur's end. He was always near the ocean. "I know," he said. "I just wanted to hear your voice." The line was quiet for a moment. Then Arthur said, "Go claim your kingdom, kid." Harry hung up. He shouldered his bag. He walked through the camp boundary and out into the Long Island sunshine, and he didn't look back because looking back was not the direction he was going. Platform 9¾ was waiting. Hogwarts was waiting. Voldemort was waiting in whatever fractured, bodiless state Voldemort currently occupied. And somewhere in Scotland, in a lake dark enough to be its own kind of ocean, something ancient was already stirring, already feeling the approach of Poseidon's blood, already preparing to recognize its king. Harry Potter, son of Poseidon, late of Atlantis and Camp Half-Blood, walked into King's Cross Station with his trunk and his owl and the quiet, settled authority of someone who had never in his life needed to convince himself that he belonged wherever he was standing. He walked through the barrier between platforms 9 and 10 and felt the magic close around him like water, comfortable, familiar, his. He stepped out onto platform 9¾ and stopped. The platform was chaos. Beautiful, brilliant, noisy chaos, owls and cats and trunks and families, and the great scarlet engine breathing steam into the September morning air. Children in all directions, some nervous, some excited, some already trying to look cool and failing, and parents pressing sandwiches and last-minute instructions on them with the universal parental conviction that one more piece of advice would be the one that made the difference. Harry stood in the middle of it and looked around with the attentive calm of a general surveying new terrain. Then he found an empty compartment, stowed his trunk, settled his owl, sat down by the window, and opened one of Annabeth's recommended books. He was still reading when the Hogwarts Express pulled out of the station, and still reading when a girl with bushy brown hair knocked on his compartment door looking for a toad, and still reading when the first hints of Scottish Highlands appeared outside the window, purple and wild and impossibly old. He looked up from the page at the mountains. The mountains looked back. "Right," Harry Potter said to no one and to everything. "Let's go." Chapter 2: The Sorting of a King. The boats crossed the Black Lake at night, and Harry let his hand trail in the water. He felt it the moment his fingers broke the surface, not temperature, not texture, but presence. The lake was deep, genuinely deep, the kind of depth that swallowed light and kept its own counsel, and something in that depth noticed him the way a sleeping animal notices a familiar footstep. Not alarmed, not aggressive, just aware. He could feel the attention of it pressing gently up through the cold water against his fingertips like a question. "Who are you?" He knew how to answer that kind of question, and not with words. He let a small, controlled pulse of intent move through his hand, the way Arthur had taught him, the way the ocean spoke, not in language but in identity. "I'm here. I know you're here. We'll talk properly later." The lake went still around his boat specifically, a perfect circle of glass in the middle of the wind-chopped surface, and Hermione Granger, sitting across from him, looked down at the water and then up at him with an expression that was half startled and half fascinated. "Did you?" she started. "Wind shifted," Harry said pleasantly. She looked at the water. She looked at the other boats, rocking normally in the October chop. She looked at Harry. She had been looking at him with that expression, cataloging, assessing, filing, since she'd knocked on his compartment door 4 hours ago and found him reading ancient magical theory and its elemental foundations with the focused attention of someone who was not reading it for the first time. She'd asked what he thought of Chapter 7. He'd told her the author's argument about elemental affinities was structurally sound, but missed the mark on why certain bloodlines manifested certain powers, because he was treating magic like a system when it was more like a language. She'd sat down without being invited, and they'd argued about it for 3 hours while the Scottish countryside darkened outside the window, and it had been, Harry thought, a genuinely good 3 hours. She didn't press the water question. She filed it. He could see her filing it. Neville Longbottom, on Harry's left, was too occupied with not dropping his toad to notice anything. The toad, Trevor, a creature of deeply ambivalent personality, had made 3 escape attempts since Newcastle and showed no signs of reducing his ambitions. Harry had twice retrieved Trevor from the floor with a small, subtle current of air that Neville had attributed to his own increasingly frantic grabbing, and Neville had thanked him anyway, which Harry found charming. The castle came out of the dark as the boats rounded a headland, and Harry lowered his hand into the water one last time and straightened up to look at it properly. Hogwarts was enormous and old and improbable, built on a crag above the lake as if it had grown there rather than been constructed, all towers and battlements and windows burning amber against the night sky. It was the kind of building that wanted to be impressive and succeeded, and Harry, who had seen Atlantis, who had been inside structures that predated human civilization, gave it its due. "Wow," Neville said softly. "Yeah," Harry agreed. Hermione was doing the architectural taxonomy thing silently beside him, and Harry let her because it was her version of wonder and it was no less real for being organized. The boats docked. They filed up steps cut into the cliff face, following a giant of a man named Hagrid who moved with surprising grace for someone his size and kept looking at Harry with an expression Harry couldn't fully read. Recognition threaded with something more complicated, guilt-adjacent, like someone who had made a decision years ago and was only now reckoning with what came of it. Harry knew who he was. Chiron had told him. He didn't press it. There would be time. The doors opened. The entrance hall was stone and candlelight, and the smell of old books and something savory coming from somewhere below, and the noise of hundreds of students bounced off the vaulted ceiling and scattered. An older student in robes herded the first years to one side, and they stood in a nervous cluster while the great hall murmured and glowed through the half-open doors. Harry stood at the back of the cluster, watching. He watched the way a teacher moved through a crowd versus how a student did, differently weighted, differently purposeful. He watched which of the first years were performing nervousness versus actually feeling it, and which ones were going quiet the way prey goes quiet. He noticed that Draco Malfoy, he'd picked up the name on the train, along with Slytherin and best families and the very particular energy of someone who had been told since birth that the room ought to arrange itself around him, was watching the other first years with the calculating assessment of someone mapping a social hierarchy in real time. Malfoy's eyes landed on Harry and stopped. Harry looked back at him with no particular expression. Malfoy broke first, just barely, his gaze moving away with the careful casualness of someone pretending they'd been looking at something else all along. Harry noted it without satisfaction. It was just information. Professor McGonagall appeared and explained the sorting in the clipped, no-nonsense tones of someone who had done this 40 times and was simultaneously fond of the tradition and slightly exhausted by it. Hat, stool, 4 houses. She listed their virtues, bravery, cunning, wisdom, loyalty, and Harry listened with the genuine interest he brought to anything that told him about the structure of a place. The doors to the great hall opened. They filed in. Harry had been in large rooms. He had been in the throne room of Atlantis, which existed below 500 feet of ocean and was lit by bioluminescence and the compressed light of things that had never seen the sun. He had been in the camp's amphitheater during full claiming ceremonies when the sky was full of divine signs and the air smelled like ozone and every god with a stake in the proceedings was paying attention. He was not easily awed by rooms. But the great hall with its bewitched ceiling showing the September night in full resolution, the stars properly placed, the clouds moving, the moon doing what the moon was actually doing outside, and its 4 long tables full of watching students and its candles floating in defiance of gravity and common sense was a beautiful room, and he acknowledged that honestly. Thousands of eyes. Every one of the existing students looking at the incoming first years with the universal human impulse to assess and categorize new arrivals. Harry felt the weight of particular attention on him, heavier than random, concentrated in a way that had to do with his name and face rather than anything he'd done, and walked through it like it was weather. A battered hat on a stool opened its brim like a mouth and sang. Harry listened to the song with genuine attention. It was, he thought, better than it had any right to be. The hat clearly had something to say and knew how to say it, and the bit about seeking the best in every child landed with the ring of something actually meant rather than performed. He applauded with the rest of them when it finished. They called names alphabetically. Harry watched the sorting. The hat's conversations with each student were private. Whatever it said audible only to the child wearing it, but you could read the length of the deliberation from the outside. Most took seconds, a few took longer, the hats sitting on their heads with the focused expression of genuine deliberation. Hermione went Gryffindor in under 15 seconds, walking to the table with the barely suppressed satisfaction of someone who had predicted this outcome and was pleased to be confirmed. Neville Longbottom took over a minute, the hat settling on his head and going very still, and Neville sat rigid with the specific terror of someone waiting for a judgment they've already decided will go against them. Harry watched the hat, watched Neville, and then started clapping the instant the hat shouted Gryffindor, slightly before the rest of the room, loud enough to be the first sound Neville heard, and Neville's face did something that made the whole maneuver worthwhile. Then McGonagall said, "Potter, Harry." The great hall did not go quiet. It became quiet, which is a different thing, in active silence, the sound of several hundred people simultaneously deciding to pay attention. Harry heard his name ripple down the tables in whispers the way a stone sends rings across water. He walked to the stool. He picked up the hat. He put it on his own head before McGonagall could do it, which wasn't the done thing but wasn't prohibited either, and sat down. The hat spoke immediately directly into his mind in a voice that was old and dry and carrying the faint note of genuine surprise. "Well, you're not what I was expecting. I'm not usually," Harry thought back. "Number, I can see that." A pause, the hat clearly doing its thing, sifting, sorting, reading the layers. Harry felt it moving through his mind with the delicacy of a surgeon and the efficiency of someone who had done this 10,000 times. "Remarkable, Atlantis, Camp Half-Blood, son of Poseidon." Another pause. "I've sorted many unusual children. I don't think I've sorted a demigod before. There's a first time for everything, indeed." The hat was quiet for a moment in the way of something genuinely thinking. "You do well in any house, you know. I mean that literally. You have the courage for Gryffindor, the ambition for Slytherin, the intellect for Ravenclaw, the loyalty for Hufflepuff, all in equal and exceptional measure. It's quite something. I appreciate that," Harry thought, "but you know where I need to be. Do I? You know the school, you know the people in it, you know what's moving in the dark here." Harry kept his thoughts level, precise. Where would you put someone who came to deal with that? Someone who needed to be where it matters most. The hat was quiet for a beat longer than it had been for anyone else. "You're choosing," it said. "Most children ask me to choose for them. I'm not most children." "No," the hat said with something in its mental voice that was as close to amusement as a hat could get. "No, you really aren't." Then, Gryffindor, the table on the far left exploded. Harry took the hat off, replaced it on the stool with the care of something that deserved respect, and walked to the Gryffindor table. Hermione was clapping. Neville was clapping. The Weasley twins, he'd identified them on sight, identical, watching everything with identical bright attention, were doing something more enthusiastic than clapping that involved the bench. He sat down between Hermione and Neville, and accepted a bread roll from the suddenly appeared feast with the equanimity of someone who has learned that accepting what's offered gracefully is a form of social intelligence. Across the hall at the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy was looking at him again. Harry met his gaze, even neutral. "Whenever you're ready," the look said, without aggression, without challenge, just acknowledgement. Malfoy looked away again, and this time the deliberateness of it was the tell. "How was it?" Neville asked, meaning the sorting, meaning the hat. "Interesting conversation," Harry said, and helped himself to potatoes. Professor Snape arrived to potions the next morning like a weather front. Harry had read about him. Chiron's files on Hogwarts staff were thorough, assembled over years from various magical sources, and Snape's entry was one of the longer ones, annotated with the specific notation complex loyalties treat accordingly. He'd walked in knowing the man was brilliant, deeply wounded, almost certainly going to single him out, and the worst thing he could do in response was take it personally. Snape swept the dungeon classroom with the particular mastery of someone who understood that the first impression a teacher makes defines every subsequent interaction. He paused. He took attendance. He arrived at Harry's name and paused again, eyes moving from the roll to Harry's face. "Potter," he said, "tell me, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" Around the room, 11-year-olds were doing the universal calculation of "do I know this? And if I don't, how bad is this going to be?" Hermione's hand went up. Harry kept his down, not from ignorance but from the simple logistical preference for hearing the question properly before answering it. "The draft of living death," Harry said, without the hand, without the performance, in the same tone he'd used to answer someone who'd genuinely just asked him a question. "Sopiferous bean reduces the draft time if you crush rather than cut it, but bezoars aren't made from stone. They're masses of indigestible material from a ruminant's stomach, and Nicholas Flamel is the only known person to have produced the Philosopher's Stone. Though whether that qualifies as a single alchemist is philosophically arguable depending on how you define." "I asked one question," Snape said silkily, cutting him off. "You asked three," Harry said, not rudely, observationally. "Asphodel and wormwood, where does Bezoar come from, and Nicholas Flamel? I was getting to them in order." Silence. The dungeon held its breath. Snape's expression did not change. It was a face trained to not change, but something in his eyes did, just slightly, a recalibration happening behind them that Harry caught because he was watching for it. He dealt with people who used authority as a weapon his whole life, and the consistent truth was that they all recalibrated in similar ways when the target failed to flinch. 5 points to Gryffindor," Snape said in the tones of someone extracting a tooth without anesthetic, "for accuracy." "Do not interrupt again." "I wasn't interrupted," Harry said pleasantly. I was pausing for the fourth question. In the back row, one of the Weasley twins made a sound like a person who has swallowed a laugh and is suffering for it. Snape moved on. His teaching was, stripped of the theater, genuinely excellent, precise, demanding, building on itself in the way of someone who understood how knowledge was actually constructed rather than just how it was delivered. Harry took notes in the margins of his textbook, cross-referencing against things he'd read, flagging connections. He brewed his potion with the methodical attention of someone for whom patience was a trained skill rather than a natural virtue, and the potion came out correct, not flashy, not ostentatious, just correct, which was the point. Snape graded his work with a face that gave nothing away and moved on. At the end of class, as students filed out, Snape said, without looking up from his desk, "Potter, stay." The room emptied. Harry stayed, standing in front of Snape's desk with the easy, grounded stance of someone who had stood in front of much more imposing figures and had no particular feelings about waiting. Snape looked up. He studied Harry with an attention that was different from before, the classroom performance stripped away, something more direct underneath. Whatever he was looking for, Harry let him look. "You've been educated before this," Snape said, not a question. "Yes, not at a wizarding institution." "Number where?" Harry considered what to share and what to hold. Privately, he said, "My guardian arranged instruction, history, languages, strategic theory, natural sciences." Snape's expression didn't change, but the pause before he spoke next had the quality of someone revising their approach. "Your guardian, not the Dursleys." "I've never met the Dursleys," Harry said, another revision behind Snape's eyes. "Then you may go." Harry went unhurried, pulling his bag onto his shoulder. At the door he stopped, not for effect, but because a genuine thought had arrived. "Professor," he said, "the draft of living death. The crushing versus cutting question. There's a secondary effect on potency that most texts don't cover. If you want, I can write it up." The silence lasted long enough to be interesting. "Leave it on my desk tomorrow," Snape said. Harry nodded and went. In the corridor, Hermione fell into step beside him immediately, which he'd expected because she'd been waiting outside the door. "What did he want?" she asked. "To figure out what I am," Harry said. "What did you tell him?" "Not much." Hermione considered this with the expression of someone deciding whether to be satisfied or frustrated by an answer. She settled on satisfied, which Harry had already identified as a personality feature. She respected people who kept their counsel because she kept hers. "He's going to be watching you," she said. "He's going to be watching everyone," Harry said. "He just doesn't know he's going to be watching me in particular yet." 3 days in, Harry went to the lake. Not a social visit, not yet. He went alone before breakfast in the gray September morning when the mist was still sitting on the water and the grounds were empty except for a pair of groundskeeper's cats hunting something in the long grass by the tree line. He walked to the edge of the black lake and stood there for a moment looking at the water. It looked back. He took off his shoes, rolled up his trousers, and walked in. The Black Lake was cold in the way that water near Scotland is cold, genuinely bone-deep, committed cold, and Harry's body responded to it the way it had since he was 8 months old, which was to say not with reluctance but with the opposite of reluctance, the way that feels like coming home. He waded out to his knees and stopped. The lake went still around him exactly as it had on the boat crossing, a perfect circle of glass. The mist parted. Somewhere beneath him, deeper than the murk should have allowed him to sense, something very large turned its attention upward. Harry went still too. He closed his eyes and reached down through the water the way Arthur had taught him, not with effort, not with force, but with simple, genuine presence. "I'm here, I know you're here, I mean no harm to what's yours. I have come to," what was the oracle's word, "claim, not demand, not conquer. Claim the way a shepherd claims a field, not to own it, but to tend it, to be responsible for it, to stand between it and what might harm it." The response came up from the deep water in a pressure wave that had no physical force but carried information the way drums carry rhythm, a question and assessment, and then slowly like a door opening by increments, something that translated roughly as we have been waiting. Harry opened his eyes. The surface of the lake near him had changed. 5 Grindylows had risen to just below the waterline, their long fingers visible through the surface, their large green eyes watching him from an inch below. They weren't aggressive, they were looking at him with the specific attention of creatures that have been told something will come and are now verifying. "Hello," Harry said. The Grindylows sank a foot and then rose again, which was apparently a greeting. "I'll come back properly," Harry said. "Introduce myself to the others, but not today. Today I have transfiguration at 9. He pulled his feet out of the water, dried them by the simple expedient of the water running off his skin cleanly in the way it always did when he wanted it to, and pulled his shoes back on. He was halfway back to the castle when Neville appeared from the direction of the greenhouses, arms full of something that looked botanical and was probably an early morning plant-related errand of the type Neville seemed to genuinely enjoy. Neville looked at him, at the lake, at the wet hem of Harry's trousers drying visibly as he walked. Were you swimming? He asked. Testing the water, Harry said. It's September. Good temperature for it. Neville looked at the lake again and then at Harry with the expression he'd started developing, a kind of comfortable acceptance of the fact that Harry was going to do things that didn't fully parse and that this was fine, it was just Harry. It was an expression Harry appreciated. McGonagall gave me extra reading, Neville said, falling into step. About switching spells, it's quite a lot. I read ahead, Harry said. The key is that you're not changing the substance, you're redirecting the form. Once you think of it that way, it gets easier. Neville looked hopeful in the cautious way of someone who has been told things will get easier before and found the promise unreliable. Do you want to practice later, in the common room? Yeah, Harry said, after dinner. Neville nodded, satisfied, and shifted his armload of botanical material, and they walked up to the castle in the early morning light while the lake settled back into its ordinary-looking surface behind them and kept its secrets in the way lakes do deeply and for the time being. Quidditch tryouts were not supposed to be open to first years. This was not a rule Harry had broken. It was a rule that Oliver Wood, Gryffindor Quidditch captain, had broken on Harry's behalf after witnessing what happened during a Thursday afternoon flying lesson, and which Wood had subsequently been at peace with on the grounds that rules about first years trying out existed to prevent embarrassment, and embarrassment was clearly not going to be a factor here. What had happened during flying was this. Madam Hooch had instructed them to fly to a specific height and stop, and most students had done so with varying degrees of grace, and Neville had immediately gone vertical and horizontal in a way that Madam Hooch handled by the book, rushing to help. In the confusion, Malfoy had picked up the remembrall that Neville had dropped, turned it over in his fingers with the performative casualness of someone who knows what he's doing, looked at Harry and thrown it. Not at anyone. Into the air, hard, toward the lake, an act of casual cruelty precisely calibrated to be impossible to call out directly. Harry watched it arc through the air. He was already at 40 feet, steady on his broom, and he made the calculation in under a second, the remembrall's trajectory, the wind off the lake, the speed he'd need. He went. Later, students would try to describe what they'd seen and find it frustrating. He'd gone from stationary to flat out in a way that didn't look like acceleration. It looked like he'd been fast all along and had simply decided to stop hiding it. The broom was a school broom, old, slightly warped, the kind that kicked in gusts, and in his hands it seemed to have remembered what brooms were for. He caught the remembrall one-handed, 10 feet from the ground, and pulled out of the dive with the easy, unhurried grace of someone for whom this was slower than he was used to. He flew back to where the class was watching in the distinct silence of people who had just seen something recategorize itself, and landed. Madam Hooch's face was a study in warring impulses. Malfoy's face had gone through several expressions in quick succession and settled on something neutral that required visible effort. That, Wood said, from the broom shed where he'd been doing inventory and had stopped doing inventory in order to watch, is a seeker. Harry looked at him. Is that a position? Come to tryouts Saturday, Wood said, please. At the tryouts, which were technically not happening, and which the team had been sworn to silence about, Harry flew 3 laps of the pitch to get the feel of it, the wind currents, the way the stands changed the airflow near the goalposts, the dead zone over the center circle where 2 opposing drafts canceled each other, and then flew seeker drills that made the existing team members go quiet in the particular way of specialists watching someone do their specialty better than they do. Fred Weasley from his broomstick watched Harry pull into a dive from 90 feet that ended with the snitch pinched cleanly between his index finger and thumb, and said to his twin, George. I see it, George said, just want to make sure we're both seeing it. We are, right. Fred watched Harry bank into his return flight unhurried, the snitch still held loosely. Suppose we should be nice to him then. We're always nice, George said with the serenity of someone who has decided to redefine terms. We're always interesting, Fred said. That's different. Harry landed, handed the snitch to Wood, who was standing with the expression of a man who has found something he was not looking for but was very glad to have. Same time next week, Harry said. You're on the team, Wood said. I haven't said yes yet. Wood stared at him. You want to, I'm offering. I want to know if we actually have a chance at the cup this year, Harry said reasonably. I'm not interested in playing on a team that's going to half-effort it. What's our formation for the Hufflepuff match? Wood stared for another second. Then he grabbed his strategy clipboard and started talking, and Harry listened with genuine attention, and the twins exchanged a look that contained approximately 40 words of communication and reached a conclusion. Fred Weasley landed and clapped Harry on the shoulder. Welcome to the team, he said. Also, we're your best friends now. You don't get to decide that, Harry said. We absolutely do, George said. It's a Weasley tradition. Deciding other people's best friend status. Deciding everything, Fred said cheerfully. You'll adjust. Harry looked at them both, identical grins, identical eyes full of schemes, the specific energy of people for whom the world was something to play rather than something to navigate carefully. He thought about 6 years of Camp Half-Blood, where he'd been surrounded by children of gods who operated at various intensities of chaotic competence. Fine, he said. But I'm not pulling any pranks that involve the lake. The lake's off limits, Fred agreed immediately, which meant he'd already thought about the lake. Fred, Harry said. It's fine, Fred said. The squid looked friendly. That squid, Harry said with a patience that came from somewhere deep, is not something you want to prank. The twins exchanged another look, and this one landed differently, a recalibration, a slight revision of assumptions, the recognition that this particular comment came from a specific rather than general place. George tilted his head. You've talked to the squid, he said. Not yet, Harry said, but I will. He walked off the pitch and the twins watched him go, and then George said, Fred, yeah, he's going to be very interesting. Yeah, Fred said, I know. The library after dinner had a particular quality Harry liked. The smell of old paper and the soft, industrious sound of people thinking, and the specific piece of a space designed entirely around the idea that knowledge was worth having. He'd spent a lot of time in the Camp Half-Blood library. He'd spent a lot of time in Atlantis' archive rooms, which were carved into living rock and waterproofed and contained records going back past any human civilization's institutional memory. Libraries felt like home. He was reading, genuinely reading, not performing study when Draco Malfoy sat across from him, not dramatically. No entourage for once. Malfoy sat down with his books and arranged them with precision and didn't say anything for several minutes. Harry turned a page. You're not what I expected, Malfoy said finally to his textbook. What were you expecting? Harry asked without looking up. The boy who lived, the famous Harry Potter, a beat, someone who'd want people to know it. I don't care about it particularly, Harry said. You don't care that half this school wants to be your friend because of a scar. People want things for all kinds of reasons, Harry said. That doesn't mean I have to want the same things back. Malfoy was quiet. Harry read. The fire in the library's hearth popped. Your family, Malfoy said. Where did you grow up? Rumor is the Dursleys, but rumor's wrong, Harry said. Then where? Harry looked up at him then properly, meeting the gray eyes that were sharp and genuinely curious underneath the performed cool. He saw a boy who was intelligent and had been given bad scaffolding for that intelligence, taught to look down when he should have been taught to look forward, trained to sort people by blood when he should have been trained to sort them by quality. Not irredeemable, not yet. Somewhere I learned how to actually use what I am, Harry said, instead of just inheriting it. Malfoy held his gaze. Is that a criticism? It's an observation, Harry said. You can do what you like with it. He went back to his book. After a moment, Malfoy went back to his. They read in parallel for another 30 minutes and nothing further was said, and when Malfoy left he didn't slam his books or make a performance of leaving. Just gathered his things with the same precision he'd arranged them and walked out. Hermione, 2 tables away where she'd been watching this exchange over the top of magical theory, came over when he was gone. What was that? She said. A beginning, Harry said, or possibly an ending, I'm not sure yet. Of what? Harry thought about it. About someone who had been handed a worldview like an inheritance and was starting in small ways to weigh it against what he was actually seeing. Of him deciding what kind of person he's going to be, he said. Hermione looked at him with the expression she deployed when something surprised her, rare, genuine, quickly controlled. You figured all that out in a library conversation, she said. He sat across from me without his friends, Harry said. That told me most of it. Hermione was quiet for a moment. Then she pulled his book toward her, read the chapter heading and said, You're on the wrong chapter. The one you need is 4 pages back. I know, Harry said. I finished it. I'm cross-referencing. Against what? Something I read before I got here. Hermione made the sound of someone who has found someone who reads in ways she recognizes and is reluctantly pleased about it, and sat down. And they read in parallel until Madame Pince turned the lights down twice in the universal library signal of it's time to go. And they walked back to Gryffindor Tower together in the comfortable silence of people who have already established, without needing to discuss it, that they are going to be important to each other. In the lake outside, 60 feet down, the giant squid turned in a slow and ponderous circle and felt the particular frequency that it had been told to watch for, that it had been waiting for with the patience of something that had been patient for centuries, and settled into stillness. The king was here. Everything else could wait. Chapter 3. The lake remembers the first proper conversation happened on a Tuesday. Harry had been working up to it since arrival, not because he needed to prepare, but because introductions of this nature deserved timing. You didn't walk into someone's home the first week and immediately sit down at their table. You let them see you first. You let them understand that you knew they were there and that you weren't afraid and that you weren't a threat. Then you came to the table. 3 weeks in, the lake had been watching him long enough. He went down at 5 in the morning before the castle stirred, in the particular dark that exists just before autumn dawn when the air smells like cold stone and the hills are shapes rather than colors. He walked to the edge of the lake and took off everything except his trousers. The cold didn't bother him, but robes underwater were impractical, and he walked in without ceremony and went under. The Black Lake at depth was extraordinary. He'd been in extraordinary water before: the deep Atlantic, the Atlantean trench systems, a sea cave in the Aegean that Annabeth had sworn contained an entrance to the underworld, and which, on reflection, probably had. But this lake had a character that was entirely its own. The water was dark but not opaque. There was a quality to the darkness that felt intentional, like privacy rather than blindness. And as Harry descended, he felt his eyes adjust in the way they always did underwater, the world resolving into gradients of deep green and black, with the occasional silver flash of a fish responding to his passage. He went to the bottom and stood on the lake bed and looked around. The bottom of the Black Lake was a country. There were ruins down here, old stone, older than the castle above, fitted without mortar in the way of people who understood the permanence of stone better than modern builders did. There were forests of weed, tall and slow-moving, and clearings in those forests where the lake bed was pale gravel. There were structures that were neither ruins nor natural formations, but something between, built, clearly, but built with and from the lake itself, shaped from compacted silt and anchored stone and the accumulated material of centuries. The merpeople lived in these structures. Harry stood still and let them come to him, which they did after approximately 30 seconds, a delegation of 5 coming out of the weed forest with the careful purpose of people who have been briefed. They were not what Hogwarts wizards thought of when they thought of mermaids. They were gray-skinned and green-haired, and their faces had the kind of severity that came from living in a place that took life seriously, and their eyes were yellow, and their tails were the deep silver of the lake's deepest water. They were in the way of genuinely powerful things, not trying to be impressive. They were impressive anyway. The one in front, older than the others, a scar running along her jaw, the particular stillness of someone accustomed to command, stopped 4 feet from Harry and studied him. Harry inclined his head. Not a bow. He didn't bow to anyone whose authority he hadn't verified, but an acknowledgement, a recognition. "I see you. I respect what you are." She spoke. Mermish was not a language you learned from a book. Underwater, it was a complex of sound and water pressure, and the specific frequency vibrations that marine life used to communicate across distance. And Harry spoke it the way he spoke everything he'd learned at Camp Half-Blood, imperfectly on the technical level and fluently on the practical one. He caught maybe 70% of her meaning as language and the rest as intent, which was enough. She was saying, "We have waited long." "I know," he said. In Mermish, or as close to it as human vocal anatomy could manage underwater, his mouth formed the shapes and his intent filled the gaps. "I came when I was ready. You are Poseidon's." "Yes." She looked at him for another moment. Then she turned and gestured for him to follow, and Harry followed, because someone who has been waiting for you and then invites you into their home deserves the courtesy of accepting the invitation. She took him through the weed forest and into the settlement proper, and along the way things that lived in the lake, Grindylows keeping their distance but watching, fish schools parting for him with the instinctive deference of creatures that understood hierarchy below the level of thought, the giant squid moving in a long, slow arc 30 meters away and acknowledging him with a gesture that translated as roughly "finally," processed his passage and filed it. In a large, low-ceilinged chamber cut into the lake bedrock, the mer leader showed him something. Harry crouched down and looked at it. It was growing from the rock of the lake's floor, not a natural feature, not a geological formation. It was a darkness, literal, physical, a patch of material wrong in a way that he recognized before he could fully articulate why. The water around it tasted different. Not contaminated, tainted, which was different, the way a piece of fruit can look perfect and taste wrong and you know something internal is bad. He reached out one finger and stopped before touching it, felt the edge of it, felt what it was. Old power interrupted. A binding that had been intact for a very long time had developed a crack, and through the crack was leaking something that had no business being in a Scottish lake. It was the same quality as the pulse he'd felt when he pressed his hand to the ground near certain parts of Camp Half-Blood, the places where the underworld was close to the surface, where the membrane between alive and not was thin. Dark, not evil, old, not malignant, but being used by something that was both. He looked at the mer leader. "How long?" 2 years, she said, growing, getting faster. Yes, he straightened up. He thought about the oracle's words, a school built on secrets, a lord without form, something disembodied. Something using the school's ancient foundations as an anchor point. feeding on the darkness that collected where old power had been concentrated for centuries. Smart, patient. He'd have to verify, but he was fairly certain he was looking at the early stages of Voldemort's re-establishment strategy, the same way you'd map a drainage route before you started digging. Don't touch it, he said. Don't let your people near it. I'll deal with it, but not yet. Why not yet? Because cutting it at the root here would just make it find a different anchor, Harry said. I need to know where the other end is first. He met her yellow eyes. Do you trust me? She looked at him for a long moment. Poseidon's blood trusts itself, she said, which was not quite an answer and also entirely an answer. I'll come back, Harry said, every week, and if anything changes, if it grows faster, if something new appears, send one of the Grindylows to the surface. She agreed, and then unexpected, the gesture of someone who was extending something genuinely offered. She pressed the back of her hand briefly to the back of his, and the water around them both went warm in the specific way of something recognized. He swam back up. He broke the surface in the gray pre-dawn, the hills now showing color, the castle above him going from dark to amber as the first lights came on. He walked out of the lake, and the water ran off his skin cleanly, and he was dry by the time he reached his shoes, and he stood there for a moment looking at the water and thinking. Something was using Hogwarts as a foothold, something that had been planning for 2 years and probably longer, with enough intelligence to work through foundations and enough patience to work slowly. He wasn't afraid. He was interested in the way he'd been interested in every problem worth solving since he was old enough to understand that interesting and dangerous weren't opposites. He picked up his shoes and his shirt and walked back up to the castle. McGonagall's transfiguration classes had settled into a pattern that Harry had come to look forward to, which was not something he could say about all his classes. McGonagall was the best teacher in the school. He'd assessed this in the first week and hadn't revised it since. She taught the way Chiron taught, with rigor and genuine respect for the subject matter, and an underlying expectation that you would rise to meet the work rather than waiting for the work to come down to meet you. She was also, he'd noticed, watching him, not with the particular surveillance quality of Snape's watching, which was investigative. McGonagall's watching had a different quality, something between professional assessment and something more personal, the way you look at a thing that you feel you should recognize and can't quite place. She'd known his parents. Chiron's files had said so. She'd been a colleague of Dumbledore's for decades, had known Lily and James Potter, had been in the files, described as genuinely grieved by their deaths. Harry sat with that knowledge in the way he sat with most personal things, aware of it, not activating it without reason, waiting for the right moment. The right moment came at the end of October. He stayed after class, which he did occasionally with McGonagall, because unlike Snape's post-class conversations, these were genuinely about the material rather than assessments of his character. But today, when the other students had filed out and he turned to the question he'd been sitting with, about the theory underlying human-to-animal transfiguration versus inanimate transfiguration, specifically the role of intent versus the role of the spell mechanics, McGonagall set down her chalk and looked at him in the particular way of someone who has been waiting for a conversation to become possible. You knew my parents, Harry said, before she could arrange whatever approach she'd been planning. McGonagall went still for just a moment. Then she said, yes. What were they like? The question was genuine. He'd asked Chiron, and Chiron had given him facts. He wanted something other than facts. McGonagall sat down at her desk, which she rarely did during these conversations. She usually stood, moved, wrote on the board. Sitting was different. Your mother, she said, was the most naturally gifted student I taught in 30 years. She had a quality of absolute precision. She understood the why of magic before she understood the how, which is backwards from most students. She was kind, genuinely, not performatively. And she argued with everyone when she thought they were wrong, including me, which I respected enormously. A pause. Your father was brilliant and knew it and was working on minding it less. He got there eventually. He was brave in the best way, not recklessly, but on purpose. Harry was quiet for a moment. Thank you, he said, and meant it with the specific weight of someone who has been carrying an absence for a long time and has just been handed a piece of something to put in it. McGonagall looked at him. You're not what I expected, she said, and I say that as someone who has been expecting you for 10 years. People keep saying that, Harry said. Where did you grow up? You don't have to answer. I don't mind, Harry said. Somewhere I was taught well by good people. There are people in this world who are very concerned about you, McGonagall said with the careful phrasing of someone navigating something political. Certain people who felt they had responsibility for Dumbledore, Harry said. She neither confirmed nor denied, which was confirmation. I'll talk to him when I'm ready, Harry said. There are things I want to understand first. He picked up his bag. The transfiguration question, intent versus mechanics. If intent is the primary driver, then theoretically the spell words are scaffolding rather than structure, and advanced enough practitioners should be able to achieve the same result without the verbal component. McGonagall looked at him for a moment, the personal conversation folding back into the professional one with a smoothness that told him she was grateful for the transition. That is the foundation of nonverbal casting, yes, she said. It's fifth-year curriculum. I've been working on it, Harry said. Of course you have, she said, with the tone of someone who is not surprised and is choosing not to be exasperated. Show me on Thursday. He showed her on Thursday. The matchbox became a hedgehog without a spoken word, and the hedgehog immediately walked to the edge of the desk and looked around with the pleased curiosity of a new existence. And McGonagall looked at it with the expression that Harry had come to recognize as her version of being impressed, which was a very small, very controlled thing that lived entirely around her eyes. Fifth year, she said. You said, I'm revising my assessment of where your ceiling might be. So am I, Harry said, which was honest. The first night encounter with Quirrell happened because Harry was awake. He was often awake at night, a camp habit, the instinct of someone who'd slept in a place where night watches were real and necessary, his body's version of always leaving one eye open. He'd turned it into productive time, reading, thinking through problems, the occasional quiet trip to the lake when the mood took him. On the night of October 28th, he was returning from one such lake visit, moving through the third-floor corridor on his way back to Gryffindor Tower via a route that was technically more direct than the official path when he heard voices. He stopped, listened. Quirrell. That voice was unmistakable. The stutter was intermittent in a way Harry had already identified as selective, appearing when the man wanted to seem harmless and absent when he forgot to maintain it. The other voice was, there was no other voice. Quirrell was speaking in a low, urgent tone and then pausing and then responding to something Harry couldn't hear, and the responses were not his own. Different rhythm, different register, the specific quality of someone giving a report to someone who ranked above them. Harry moved closer, pressed against the wall, let himself become part of the corridor's background. The third floor, the corridor, a pause. A response Harry caught as fragments, not yet more time the mirror, but if someone finds another pause. Then with a sharpness that cut through the stutter entirely. No one will find it, no one at this school is, I have it handled. The mirror, the third floor corridor. Harry had already noted the locked door. It was the only locked door in a corridor that should have had nothing interesting in it, which meant it had something very interesting in it, which was the oldest tell in architectural security. He'd been letting it sit, building his picture of the situation before pulling on threads. Now a thread had presented itself. He waited until Quirrell's footsteps retreated. The man walked unevenly, another tell, stress manifesting physically, and then he went to the locked door. He stood in front of it. He didn't try the handle. He put his hand flat against the wood and felt through it the way he felt through water, sensing what was on the other side, a Cerberus. The scale of it came through the door as a warmth, the massive metabolic heat of something very large doing the specific thing of being asleep while remaining technically on duty. 3 heartbeats, not quite synchronized, a 3-headed dog then. Classic. He'd read about the one named Fluffy in the dossier Chiron had given him on significant magical creatures in Britain. And below the Cerberus leading down something cold. Something constructed in the way of a security system designed by several minds with different approaches. Multiple layers, a series of challenges. At the bottom of it, something with a specific resonance that took Harry a moment to place and then recognized, with the particular clarity of something clicking into alignment. The stone. Flammel stone, the one the Oracle had referenced, a lord without form, something that could restore a disembodied entity to physical existence, something Voldemort would want with the desperate wanting of a thing that had been nothing for 10 years. Harry took his hand off the door. He stood in the corridor for a moment, turning over what he had. Quirrell was the vessel, that much was clear from the conversation, the way someone speaks when they are speaking for a second occupant of their own body. Voldemort was in there, using Quirrell as a puppet, working toward the stone. The dark patch on the lake bed was an anchor point, a tether keeping the part of Voldemort that wasn't in Quirrell connected to the physical world as a backup. He needed more information before he moved. He needed to know the full layout of the security below the dog and whether there were any other anchor points and what Quirrell's timeline looked like. He also needed Annabeth. He sent the letter the next morning, brief, in the cipher they'd developed at camp, which looked like a letter from a schoolboy to a school friend if you weren't looking for anything. It said, there's a thing in Scotland. It's interesting. I could use your brain. Logistics your end. He addressed it to Camp Half-Blood Care of Chiron and sent it with his owl, who departed with the professional efficiency of a creature that understood that its deliveries mattered. 3 days later, a return letter arrived that said, obviously, give me 2 weeks. Don't start without me. Harry wrote back, I'll try. Annabeth wrote back, Harry. Harry wrote back, I said I'll try. The Gryffindor vs. Slytherin Quidditch match was on a Saturday, wet, the kind of November rain that came in sideways and made the pitch feel like an estuary. Harry loved it. He found the broom's particular personality in 3 weeks of practice. A Nimbus 2000, which Wood had procured with the slightly dazed generosity of someone who had decided that his seeker was a once-in-a-generation find and was going to be resourced accordingly. The Nimbus responded to intent rather than just physical input, which suited Harry exactly, and in his hands it had stopped being a school implement and started being something with opinions about flight. In the rain, at altitude, with the wind off the mountains doing interesting things to the air currents above the stands, Harry flew with the loose, easy attention of someone doing something that felt genuinely natural. He let the broom find its level, let the rain hit his face, let himself feel the pitch the way he felt open water, as an environment with its own character that you worked with rather than against. The match was rough. Slytherin played physically, which Harry had anticipated, and their keeper was good, which he had also anticipated. But the Slytherin strategy relied on intimidation as a primary tool, and intimidation required a target that experienced it as intimidating, which was a structural flaw when applied to Harry. He'd been circling at altitude for 20 minutes, the way a seeker does, watching, cataloging the pitch, building the map of where everything was, when he felt rather than saw the snitch. A flicker of movement near the Hufflepuff goalpost from last season's repaint, a glint that was slightly too gold to be rain. He went. The Slytherin seeker saw him go and followed on instinct, which was the wrong move because following meant you were a beat behind from the start and the gap only grew. Harry went flat against his broom and let everything narrow down to the trajectory. The snitch was moving right, adjusting, doing the thing snitches do when they sense pursuit, and Harry made the adjustment before the snitch did, cutting the angle, closing the distance, and then extended one hand and something hit his broom. Not a bludger. Wrong angle, wrong force profile. His broom lurched sideways and then began to spin, not a mechanical failure, not wind, something deliberate and focused that grabbed the broom from outside and started twisting it. He locked his legs and held on and looked down at the stands, because the angle meant the force was coming from below, and he scanned the crowd with the focused speed of combat training. Quirrell, standing unnaturally still, eyes fixed on Harry, lips moving. Harry made the assessment in under 2 seconds. He couldn't fight a cursed broom at altitude without tools he didn't have in his hands, but he could work with it. The spinning had a rhythm to it, and rhythm had a direction, and direction could be used. He let the broom complete one full spin and used the momentum to straighten, not against the curse but with it, using the centrifugal force to slingshot himself into a controlled dive. For approximately 4 seconds he was in freefall, the broom a weapon rather than a vehicle, and in those 4 seconds he found the snitch again, below him, drifting toward the Gryffindor end, leisurely the way they do when no one's chasing them. He hit the broom again on the way down and brought it level and took the snitch out of the air with his teeth because both hands were occupied with the broom and he needed his hands free. He landed. He stood up. He took the snitch out of his mouth with 2 fingers and held it up. The crowd was doing several things simultaneously, none of them quiet. In the commentary box, Lee Jordan said something that Minerva McGonagall technically asked him to take back but did not push hard on. Wood sprinted across the pitch. He grabbed Harry by the shoulders, looked at his face, looked at the snitch, said, "You caught it with your, how did you, your broom was, it was doing it. Countercurse resolved it," Harry said simply, which was not technically the full truth but was the component of the truth he wanted to deploy right now. Good match. It was 9 minutes. Efficient, Harry said. What's our next game? In the stands, Fred and George Weasley were doing the kind of celebrating that involved lifting people, and Hermione was clapping with the specific relieved intensity of someone who had been holding their breath, and Neville was red-faced with joy. And Ron Weasley, he'd been building a tentative friendship with Ron over shared meals and chess games, a boy who was uncomplicated in his loyalties and extremely good at anything that required 3-dimensional thinking, was yelling Harry's name with the full conviction of someone who had found a hero and was extremely committed to the role. Harry looked up at the staff section. Snape, watching him. Specifically watching him in the way of someone rapidly revising the intelligence picture they'd been working from. Harry met his gaze for exactly 1 second, then looked away. He knew Snape hadn't been the one cursing his broom. He'd be spending some time confirming that Quirrell had been the caster, though he was already 90% certain. Snape, he thought, might actually have been trying to help, performing a countercurse of his own. The implications of that were worth sitting with. In the changing room, Wood gave a speech about the season that was half tactical and half purely emotional and entirely genuine, and the team listened with the warmth of people who had just won something together. And Harry sat on the bench with mud on his face and the snitch turning over in his fingers, and thought about Quirrell standing in the crowd with the unmistakable focus of someone trying to kill him. Not afraid. Annoyed slightly, the way you're annoyed when someone moves up their timeline without telling you. He'd have to accelerate his own. November's end brought the first snow, And with it a change in the castle's quality, warmth moved inward. The corridors after dark had a particular amber quiet, and the great hall smelled permanently of things being cooked and hot things being drunk and the specific comfort of being inside when it was cold outside. Harry had been at Hogwarts for 3 months, and it had done something he hadn't anticipated, which was become a place he liked. Not home, Camp Half-Blood was home, or the ocean was home, or Arthur's cottage on the Devon coast was home, but liked, which was its own category. He liked the way Hermione argued with him about things at breakfast. He liked the way Neville had started standing differently, shoulders back, something settled in his face where there had been apology. He liked the way the twins occasionally appeared beside him like very tall weather events and proposed things that were somewhere between terrible and inspired. He liked the lake best. He went twice a week now, always before dawn, and each visit went deeper into the settlement, further into the Mer community, building the trust that couldn't be rushed. The Mer leader's name, as best as he could render it in air language, was something like Silvmara. She was the eldest of the lake's community, had been there since before the castle was built, and she had seen things in the Black Lake's history that no book had recorded because no wizard had thought to ask the people living in it. She told him over several visits about the lake's old pacts, agreements made between the founders of Hogwarts and the lake's inhabitants, guarantees of sovereignty in exchange for cooperation. The giant squid was a guardian, one of the original 3, the other 2 had been there before recorded time. The merpeople were citizens of a sovereign community that had long-standing treaty rights with the school, rights that had been progressively ignored as the wizarding world developed the specific institutional amnesia of people who have power and have stopped thinking about how they got it. He listened to all of it. He filed it in the part of his brain that Annabeth called the eventual leverage archive, which she'd named it because Harry had a habit of accumulating understanding without deploying it until exactly the right moment. The wizards don't come down anymore, Silvmara told him on the last visit of November. They used to, the first ones. The one who built the dungeons came every season to speak with us. Salazar Slytherin, Harry said. Yes, he was difficult, the Mermish equivalent of a diplomatic assessment, but he came. And now they send students once a year, she said, with the particular tone of someone describing something that started as a relationship and became a ritual. For a task, they don't speak with us. They compete through us. Harry thought about the Triwizard Tournament records he'd read in the library. The second task, the hostages in the lake. The merpeople as set dressing for a human event in their own home. He felt something that was not quite anger, but was anger adjacent. The specific feeling he got when something was being done wrong in a way that no one had examined critically in a long time. When I'm here, he said, this lake is under my authority. Not Hogwarts' authority, not the ministry's, mine. He met Silvmara's yellow eyes. That means anyone who enters this lake without your community's permission is trespassing in my territory. I'll make that clear to the school when the time is right. Silvmara was still for a moment. The water around them both went warm. Then she said in the formal register of her language that meant something was being ratified rather than merely spoken, the lake recognizes its king. Harry inclined his head. Not a bow, recognition returned. The king recognizes the lake, he said in the same register. He swam back up with the particular buoyancy of someone who has just acquired a kingdom, which was not the kind of thing you could put on a form but was nonetheless real, and broke the surface into the December dark and stood on the edge of the Black Lake with the castle blazing above him. Behind him in the deep water, the dark patch on the lake bed pulsed once, growing, impatient. Harry looked back at it through the water without turning his head, feeling it, mapping it, and let himself know, fully and without anxiety, exactly what it was he was going to have to do. The lake needed its king. He was here. Everything else was timing. Chapter 4. When Annabeth came to Hogwarts, she arrived on a Wednesday, which Harry thought was very Annabeth, not a dramatic Friday entrance, not a casual Monday arrival, but Wednesday, the precise middle of the week, because she would have calculated the optimal day for maximum operational time before the weekend and acted accordingly. He was at breakfast when the owl came in, not his own owl but a camp owl, gray and serious, dropping a folded note on his plate with the efficiency of a postal service that had never once been late. He unfolded it one-handed while buttering toast with the other. Hogsmeade, 3 sisters and 8M, don't be late. A Hermione beside him watched him tuck the note into his pocket without comment, then failed to maintain the not commenting. Who's that from? Friend, Harry said, from before Hogwarts. Yes, the one you mentioned, Annabeth. He looked at her. He'd mentioned Annabeth once in passing 3 weeks ago. Hermione's memory for conversational detail was a thing of genuine wonder. Yes, he said. Is she a witch? Harry considered the full complexity of that question. A daughter of Athena trained at Camp Half-Blood, capable of building a fully functional tactical fortification from found materials in under 2 hours. currently enrolled in a New York school under a mortal alias, technically not a witch in the wizarding sense, but in possession of enough divine power to make the distinction feel academic. She's something, he said. That's not an answer. It's a complete answer, Harry said. Just not a simple one. Hermione made the face she made when she decided to let something rest temporarily while continuing to think about it. Ron, across the table, was too involved in an argument with Fred about the legitimate applications of certain charms to pay attention, and Neville was reading a herbology supplementary text with the concentrated devotion of someone who had found their subject and was going all in. Harry looked at the note again. Don't be late. I'll be back by lunch, he told the table at large and finished his toast. Hogsmeade in December was the kind of beautiful that comes with personal cost, every surface frosted, every breath visible, the main street's shop fronts lit from inside with amber warmth that made the cold outside feel deliberate rather than uncomfortable. Harry walked it in the early morning before most of the village was moving, his breath clouding ahead of him, and found the Three Sisters Inn at the far end of the high street, a narrow building pressed between a tea shop and a bookshop as if it had grown there by accident. Annabeth was already inside. Of course she was. She was in the back corner, which was the tactically sound position, sight lines to both doors, back to the wall, a cup of something hot in front of her, and a map on the table that she'd folded to show a section of Scottish Highlands that included the valley Hogwarts sat in. She was 12 years old, and she looked like someone's completely normal preteen sibling until you noticed the gray eyes, which had the quality of eyes that have seen more than 12 years should contain and were processing the current room with the speed of a machine that never fully switched off. She looked up when Harry walked in. She looked at him for a moment, the full catalog head to toe, the specific Annabeth Chase assessment protocol that meant I'm checking you for injuries and threat status simultaneously. You look good, she said. You look like you've been traveling since yesterday, he said. Since the day before, she said without self-pity as a logistical clarification. Sit down, I've got a lot. He sat, he looked at the map. How did you get into the country? Chiron has contacts, she said. British magical community has a whole side channel for non-wand practitioners. It's not hard if you know the right people and have the right blood. She tapped the map. Show me where the school is. He pointed. She studied the position, then pointed at several features: the lake, the surrounding hills, the single rail connection to the nearest town. Water table. Lake feeds from the north through an underground channel system, Harry said. Exit south subsurface, connects to the River Almond Basin eventually. The lake itself is its own system, deep enough to have its own thermal dynamics. And that's where the anchor point is. Lake bed, southeast quadrant, roughly 70 feet down. He picked up her cup, which turned out to be tea with too much milk, which was very British of her and which she was clearly powering through on principle. You've been reading. I've been reading everything, she said. Voldemort, the stone, Hogwarts founding, Nicholas Flamel, the current magical political structure, Harry. This situation is more complex than your letter made it sound. My letter was a sentence and a half, hence my point. She pulled a second piece of paper from under the map, notes dense in her angular precise handwriting, cross-referenced with small geometric diagrams that were her shorthand for power flow dynamics. Voldemort isn't just using Quirrell as a vessel. The anchor point in the lake is one of three. I think there's a second one somewhere in the castle's foundation level, probably the dungeons, and a third one. She paused, tapped the page. I think it's in the stone itself, or rather, I think he's built his re-embodiment strategy around the stone as the terminus, with two anchor points feeding into it like a circuit. Harry was quiet for a moment, going through it. If you remove an anchor without taking the terminus first, the circuit compensates, Annabeth said. Like cutting one leg of a tripod, the whole thing tips but doesn't fall. She looked at him. You need to take all three simultaneously, or take the stone first and then the anchors collapse on their own because there's nowhere for the circuit to point. The stone first, Harry said, then the anchors dissolve. But getting to the stone means going through whatever Dumbledore built to protect it. 7 layers, Harry said. I've mapped 4 of them from the lake bedside. Cerberus, something plant-based, something that flies, Quidditch-related, knowing this school, and probably a logic puzzle because there's an academic feel to the whole architecture. Annabeth looked at him with the expression that meant she was impressed and was going to turn it into a practical statement. How do you know it's 7? The dark patch on the lakebed pulses on a 7-count rhythm. 7 points of contact, 7 challenges. He picked up her notes. What's the castle's founding date? Exact, not the official version. She reached across and turned 3 pages over. Here, 993 CE by official record, but there are foundation stones in the lowest level that date to approximately 350 CE, which means the castle was built on something older. If Voldemort's anchors are keyed to the castle's original power source, then they're using the old foundations as a conductor, Harry said, which means the anchor in the dungeons isn't recent. It was placed there years ago, before Quirrell. Annabeth looked at him steadily. Before Quirrell, she confirmed, which means Voldemort had someone inside this school before his defeat, someone who's been maintaining the anchors. Harry put the notes down. He thought about that, the long game of it, the patience required, the insider access, someone who had been here for years. Someone with access to the dungeons, to the lake bed, possibly through a connection to the lake's magical infrastructure that a staff member would have. Not Quirrell, he said. Quirrell is new, Annabeth agreed. 1 year, whoever placed the anchors had been here longer. They looked at each other across the table, across the map and the notes and the cold dregs of 2 milky tea, with the specific quality of 2 people who have been thinking about the same problem from slightly different angles and have just reached the same intersection. I need to get you into the school, Harry said. I was hoping you'd say that, Annabeth said. I have a plan. Of course you do. It's a good plan. Your plans are always good, Harry said. They're just also always alarming. The two aren't mutually exclusive. Getting Annabeth into Hogwarts required navigating the school's visitor protocols, which existed on paper and in practice operated at the intersection of magical security and institutional British awkwardness. Harry went to McGonagall, which was his default move for anything requiring official authorization, on the grounds that McGonagall would respond to a clear, reasonable request with a clear, reasonable answer rather than with politics. He told her he had a close friend visiting from America, homeschooled, magically trained, not yet placed at any official institution, who needed access to the library for research she couldn't do elsewhere. He told her this calmly, directly, without the specific quality of someone asking permission so much as informing someone of something he was going to do and giving them the opportunity to be involved. McGonagall looked at him over the rims of her glasses. This friend, what sort of magical training? Exceptional, Harry said. She's 12. She's the most strategically gifted person I know. That, McGonagall said, is quite a statement. It's accurate. McGonagall was quiet for a moment. There are protocols, I know, Harry said. I thought you'd rather handle it properly than have me handle it in a way that doesn't involve the protocols. Another pause. McGonagall made a sound that might have been the early stages of a laugh, controlled before deployment. Bring her to my office at 9 tomorrow morning, she said. I'll see about a visitor's authorization. Thank you, Harry said and left, and reflected that the right person to ask was always the person who would say yes for the right reasons rather than the person who couldn't say number. Annabeth met McGonagall at 9, and McGonagall asked her 3 questions about magical theory, and got 3 answers that made her visibly revise her assessment upward each time. And Annabeth got a visitor's pass and a library authorization and a stern warning about restricted sections, to which Annabeth said, "Of course, Professor," in a tone of complete sincerity that meant she had already identified which restricted sections were relevant and was planning her approach. They were in the library by 10. She's excellent, Annabeth said of McGonagall, setting her bag on a table with the efficiency of someone who had been doing research in unfamiliar libraries since she was 7. I know, Harry said. Her transfiguration theory is more sophisticated than anything published in the American magical academic literature. The cross-application to architectural enchantment alone. Annabeth stopped herself because she recognized the way Harry was looking at her, which was the way he looked at her when she was doing the thing where she fell into the material. What? Nothing, Harry said. It's just nice, you being interested in things. I'm always interested in things, Annabeth said, pulling a stack of requested books toward her. I know, Harry said. It's consistently one of your best qualities. She looked at him. He was already opening a book with the particular focus that meant his brain had moved on. She shook her head and opened her own. They worked in parallel for 3 hours. The library had that quality it always had. The soft industry of it, the smell, the way sound softened to a respectful murmur. And Annabeth fell into the rhythm of a Hogwarts library morning, which was slightly different from a Camp Half-Blood library morning in that there were British students who looked at her with the specific Hogwarts student expression of assessing a newcomer. And after approximately 20 minutes, she had decided she liked the girl with the bushy hair who was clearly doing 3 separate research tracks simultaneously, and had nodded at Annabeth across the stacks in the professional acknowledgement of someone recognizing a fellow serious researcher. Hermione found them at the table at noon. She stopped at the edge of the table, looked at the books, both the ones Harry had out and the entirely different set Annabeth had pulled, covering magical architecture, ancient power sources, and what appeared to be a very old text on pre-Hogwarts Scottish magical geography, and said, "You're not here for library research." "We're definitely doing library research," Annabeth said. "You're researching something specific," Hermione said. Something you're not telling anyone, she looked at Harry. Both of you, Harry looked at Annabeth. Annabeth looked at Harry with the gray eyes and the specific expression that said this is your call, it's your world. Harry thought about Hermione, 3 months of her, the quality of her attention, the way she'd noticed the lake on the boat crossing and filed it and said nothing. The way she'd found her own way to every conclusion he'd pointed toward and arrived there sometimes before he did. The way she'd looked at Quirrell in the corridor one afternoon and said quietly to Harry, "There's something wrong with him," without prompting, without being told. "Sit down," Harry said. Hermione sat. "What we tell you stays with you," Annabeth said, directly, making eye contact with the zero-nonsense quality of someone for whom trust was a precise instrument. "Not because we're being dramatic, because the wrong information reaching the wrong person at the wrong time is tactically dangerous." Hermione looked at her with the expression of someone meeting a person they're going to respect. "Agreed," she said. They told her not everything, not the Camp Half-Blood parts, not the Demigod parts, not Poseidon. Those were Harry's and he'd share them when he was ready. But they told her about the stone, about Quirrell, about the anchor points, about the circuit theory Annabeth had worked out. They told her about the dark patch on the lake bed and what it meant. They told her about the timeline, that something was going to happen before the school year ended and that they were going to be the ones stopping it. Hermione listened to all of it without interrupting, which was, for Hermione, an act of profound discipline. When they finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The troll on Halloween." Harry looked at her. "What about it?" "Quirrell let it in," she said. "I didn't say anything because I couldn't prove it, but I was near the third-floor corridor when the alarm was raised and he came from that direction, not from the Great Hall." She paused. "I think he was trying to use the confusion to access the stone." Annabeth made a note. "What stopped him?" "You did," Hermione said to Harry. "You going down to the dungeon meant the teachers came. It disrupted whatever he was planning." Harry thought about Halloween, the troll, the dungeon, Hermione trapped in the bathroom, the specific chaos of a school full of panicking children that would have given Quirrell exactly the kind of cover he needed. "He's getting impatient," Harry said. "Or he's being pushed," Annabeth said. "If Voldemort's fragments are getting harder to maintain across 3 anchor points, he'd be pushing Quirrell harder, increasing the pressure." She looked at Harry. "We have less time than I thought." "How much less?" "Weeks," she said, "not months." Hermione had been quiet through this exchange, with the quality of someone updating her internal map very rapidly. "What can I do?" she said. Harry looked at her. She was asking with the specific directness of someone who had already decided they were in and was moving past the offer stage to the logistics stage. He felt the thing he felt about Hermione regularly, the particular respect that came from recognizing someone who operated the way you did, who thought first and performed second and meant what they said. "The logic puzzle layer," he said. "In the stone's protection, it'll be something academic. I need someone who knows this school's faculty well enough to predict who built it and what they'd have used." Hermione's expression sharpened in the way of someone being handed exactly the right tool. "Potions puzzle," she said immediately. "It would be Snape's contribution. He'd use something that looks impossible but has a clear logical solution to someone who's read widely enough." A pause. "I've already been reading widely enough." "I know you have," Harry said. She looked at him with something that was not quite a smile but was what happened in the space before a smile. "The plant layer," she said. "Devil's snare, Professor Sprout. The response is light fire specifically, but light will do it." "Flying keys," Annabeth said, cross-referencing against her notes. "That's the Quidditch layer." "Flying keys," Harry confirmed. "Enchanted, the right one opens the door. I can handle that." He thought about the Cerberus. "The music puts the dog to sleep. That's Hagrid's. He's not subtle." "You know an awful lot about the protection system," Hermione said, not accusatory, curious. "I asked the lake," Harry said, which was accurate if incomplete. Annabeth looked at him. "You said 7 layers. We've covered 5. The 6th is a chess set," Harry said. "Wizard's chess, life-size, probably." "Ron," Hermione said immediately. Harry nodded. "The 7th I haven't been able to map fully. It's at the terminus directly before the stone. There's something reflective in the resonance, something that shows things or perceives things." "The Mirror of Eris," Hermione said with sudden certainty. Both Harry and Annabeth looked at her. "Dumbledore moved it from the 7th floor 3 weeks ago," she said, slightly defensively. "I noticed things. It went to the 3rd floor, the right wing, which aligns with the staircase down to the protection chambers." She folded her hands on the table. "It shows you what you most desire. If you don't understand what you're seeing, you'd be trapped by it. That's the final test, whether you want the stone for yourself or for something else." Annabeth looked at Harry with the gray eyes. "And what do you want most?" It wasn't a challenge. It was genuine, the question of someone who knew him and knew the mirror's implications and was asking so they could plan around the answer. Harry thought about it honestly. About the ocean and Arthur and Camp Half-Blood and Godric's Hollow in the rain. About the lake below him with its merpeople and its packs and its kingdom waiting to be properly governed. About Hermione arguing about books at breakfast and Neville standing straighter and the twins being disasters and Quirrell walking the corridors with something terrible wearing his face. The stone goes nowhere near Voldemort, he said. That's what I want. I'd see myself putting it somewhere he can never reach it, which means the mirror would show me doing exactly what I need to do. He looked at them both, which is not a problem. Annabeth was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's a very clean answer." "I had a good teacher," Harry said. Annabeth looked at the table. "You cannot tell anyone I went soft," she said to the notes. "Wouldn't dream of it," Harry said. Complication, which Harry had been expecting because complications were structurally inevitable in any operation of this nature, arrived in the form of Draco Malfoy. Not dramatically, nothing with Malfoy was dramatic anymore, which was itself a development. He fell in step beside Harry in the corridor outside the Great Hall after dinner on the day Annabeth had been exploring the castle's lower levels on her own authority, and Harry had been covering by being visibly present at all the right times. "Your friend," Malfoy said, "the American, what about her?" "She went into the dungeons this afternoon." Not an accusation, an observation. The lower corridors, beyond the potions classroom. Harry kept walking. "Did she?" "She was there for 40 minutes and came back with mud on her knees that matches the material in the sub-basement level, which is below the potions classroom, which is not a place visitors are authorized to go." Harry looked at him. Malfoy was watching him with the gray eyes that were sharp today, sharper than usual. The performed cool was thinner, something more direct and uncertain underneath. "What do you want, Draco?" The first name landed. They'd been Potter and Malfoy in public and nothing at all in private, and the first name was a choice and both of them knew it. Malfoy was quiet for a moment. They were in a side corridor now, the main traffic of post-dinner students flowing past the entrance. "There are rumors," he said finally, "about the third floor, about what's being kept there." He paused. "My father told me before school that certain objects were being moved for safekeeping. He was interested in their location." Harry stopped walking. He turned and looked at Malfoy fully. At the boy who had been handed a world view with his name embroidered on it and was standing here now in a side corridor, telling Harry something he didn't have to tell him. "Your father," Harry said carefully, "is interested in the stone." Malfoy said nothing, which was an answer. Harry thought about it, the long implications of it, what Lucius Malfoy's interest in the stone meant, whether that interest was personal opportunism or whether Malfoy Sr. had maintained the kind of connection to Voldemort that survived a decade of the man being less than a ghost. He thought about what it cost Draco to be standing here in a side corridor, telling Harry Potter things about his own family. "Why are you telling me this?" Harry said. Another pause. "Because you're going to do something about it," Malfoy said, with the slightly frustrated quality of someone stating something they consider obvious. "And because," he stopped. "Because," Harry said. "Because whatever is in that corridor isn't something my father should have," Malfoy said very quietly. "And I know the difference between things he should have and things he wants. Even if another stop, a different kind, the kind of stop that was someone pressing on something that hurt and wasn't sure whether to keep pressing. Even if you wish you didn't," Harry said, Malfoy's jaw tight. "This conversation didn't happen," he said. "What conversation?" Harry said. Malfoy looked at him for a moment, something in his face doing something unguarded and quickly controlled, and then walked away, back toward the Slytherin end of the castle, his shoulders straight and his pace exactly normal, performing the ease of someone who had not just done something difficult. Harry watched him go. Then he went to find Annabeth. She was in the library again, which was her natural habitat, mud apparently cleaned off her knees and a new set of notes on the table. She looked up when he sat down. "The sub-basement has a second anchor point," she said without preamble. "Tell me." "It's in the north wall of the lowest corridor. Built into the foundation stone, literally cast into the mortar when the original structure was laid. Whoever placed it knew what they were doing and did it a very long time ago." She tapped her diagram. "It's keyed to the stone's chamber. If the stone is activated in Voldemort's favor, this anchor triggers and I think broadcasts, like a signal." "Summoning," Harry said. "If he gets embodied using the stone, this calls the rest of him home." "Exactly. The lake anchor is the holding pattern. The dungeon anchor is the summons, the stone is the engine." She looked at him. "We shut down the engine, the other two are just dead weight, residual power with nowhere to go. They dissipate in, I'd estimate 3 days, maybe less with a direct intervention." "Can you break the dungeon anchor?" "Already did," Annabeth said with the complete equanimity of someone reporting a completed task. Harry stared at her. "You've been here for 2 days. The mud was a hint," she said. "It's dormant now, not gone, but disconnected, like cutting a wire. The circuit's incomplete. Voldemort can't summon himself even if he gets the stone, as long as the lake anchor stays dormant too." "Which it will," Harry said. "I've got the lake." Annabeth looked at him across the table with the full gray-eyed attention that meant she was going to say something real. You've done well here, she said. The merpeople, the anchors, Quirrell, Malfoy, a pause. You've been running a whole operation without any backup. I had backup, Harry said. I just hadn't called it in yet. I'm your backup. You're my peer, Harry said. That's different. He looked at her. The dungeon anchor, no one knows you were down there. One person saw me, she said. Blonde boy, Slytherin robes. He looked at me and I looked at him and he kept walking. That's Malfoy, Harry said. He's fine. Annabeth raised an eyebrow. He's fine. He came to me tonight, Harry said. He told me his father is interested in the stone's location. He told me because he wanted me to stop it. Annabeth was quiet, turning this over with the precise thought she brought to human intelligence assessments. He's choosing sides, she said. Slowly, Harry said, and he'd never say it that way, but yeah. Do you trust him? Not completely, Harry said honestly. But I trust that he told me the truth tonight, and I trust that he's smart enough to understand what it means if Voldemort comes back. Whatever his family's history, he'd have to be blind not to see what it would mean for him personally. Fear-based reliability, Annabeth said. Not the best foundation, but not nothing. It's a start, Harry said. Most things are. She looked at him for a moment. When do we move on the stone? Harry thought about timing, about Quirrell's growing desperation, about Voldemort's pressure, about the anchor Annabeth had disconnected and how long before Voldemort felt the change and accelerated his plans, about the mirror at the end of the chamber and what it would show him when he stood in front of it. Soon, he said, but not tonight. He looked out the library window at the dark Scottish sky, stars bright above the castle towers, the lake invisible but present below. I want one more week. I want to be absolutely certain about the chest layer. I'm going to need Ron, and I need to tell him enough for him to understand what he's walking into. He paused, and I want to talk to Dumbledore first. Annabeth looked surprised. Before or after? Before, Harry said, not to ask permission, to tell him it's happening. He should know. A beat, and I want to see what he does with knowing. It'll tell me things about him I need to understand before this is over. Annabeth nodded slowly. That's smart. I learned from the best, Harry said. Obviously, she said, and turned back to her notes, and Harry looked out at the dark castle grounds and the invisible lake below, and felt the weight of what was coming settle over him not as pressure but as purpose, the clean, directed feeling of someone who knows what they're there to do and is ready to do it. Below, in the deep water of the Black Lake, the dormant anchor sat in the lake bed mud, severed from its circuit, and the lake held it the way a body holds a splinter, contained, neutralized, waiting for its king to decide what to do with it. The king was deciding. It wouldn't be long now. Chapter 5, The Mirror and the King. The meeting with Dumbledore happened on a Monday evening, in the headmaster's office at the top of a spiral staircase that moved like something with opinions about who deserved to climb it. Harry had been in the office twice, once for the scheduled first-week introduction that all students received and that Harry had treated as an intelligence-gathering exercise, and once when Snape had referred an incident about a third-year Slytherin who had cornered Neville near the dungeons and found himself suddenly, inexplicably, very wet. That second visit had been brief, and the Slytherin in question had been quietly relocated to a different patrol route, which Harry took as evidence that Dumbledore was more pragmatic than his public persona suggested. This visit Harry had requested himself. He'd sent a note through McGonagall that said simply, I'd like to speak with you. Tuesday evening if convenient, H. Potter. The reply came back in 2 hours, my office. Monday would suit better, 7 p.m. The password is sherbet lemon. The Monday timing was Dumbledore moving the conversation closer rather than later. Interesting. Harry took the stairs at 6:58, knocked at 6:59, and went in at 7. The office was extraordinary in the way of places that have accumulated significance over time. Not designed to impress, but impressive anyway. Portraits of previous headmasters doing the thing magical portraits did. The soft mechanical ticking of silver instruments on every surface. A bird on a perch that was clearly a phoenix and was watching Harry with the specific attention of a creature that recognized something. Harry looked at it. It looked back. Something passed between them that was not language and not nothing. Dumbledore was behind his desk, and he looked exactly like his reputation, the long beard, the half-moon glasses, the particular quality of being very old without being diminished by it. Power sitting in him the way power sits in deep water, not visible on the surface but present in the weight of things. He looked at Harry over the glasses with eyes that were genuinely blue, the kind of blue that meant something, and he smiled with the practiced warmth of someone who had been making people comfortable for a very long time. Harry, he said, please sit down. Harry sat down. He looked at Dumbledore, and Dumbledore looked at him, and there was a moment in which both of them were doing the same thing, which was the quiet, genuine assessment of someone deciding how honest to be and how soon. Dumbledore broke it, which surprised Harry slightly. You've grown up exceptionally well, he said with a directness that cut through the warmth. I owe you an apology for my part in making your early years more difficult than they needed to be. Harry looked at him. You let Arthur take me. I argued against it, Dumbledore said, with the specific candor of someone who has decided that honesty is the better strategic position. For approximately 3 months, I was actively concerned about where you were and whether you were safe. Then I received a letter from Arthur Curry, which was informative. A pause. He has a very direct way of writing. He does, Harry agreed. He told me you were Poseidon's child. Dumbledore said it without drama, folding his hands. I spent some time understanding what that meant. The intersection of the wizarding world and the Olympian one is not well documented in our literature. But not unknown either. There are old bloodlines that carry both. Yours is one of them. Harry thought about this, the information Dumbledore had been sitting on for 6 years, the adjustments it would have required to the plans the man had already made before Arthur found Harry in the ruins. The plan that had required a scared, ignorant boy to walk into Voldemort and survive on love and prophecy. He felt the outlines of it and kept his voice level. You had a different plan, he said, for who I was supposed to be. Dumbledore held his gaze. Not defensively, with the quality of someone looking directly at something that was difficult to look at. Yes, he said, tell me. Another pause. Then Dumbledore did, and Harry gave him credit for it, the full architecture of what he'd built around the prophecy, the protection in Lily's blood, the plan that had Voldemort's defeat hinging on a final sacrifice that Harry would have to walk into knowingly. The Horcruxes, the Deathly Hallows, the long, careful preparation for a boy who would die and come back and end it. Harry listened to all of it without interrupting. When Dumbledore finished, the office was very quiet except for the ticking instruments. The piece of Voldemort in me, Harry said, the unintentional Horcrux. Yes, you knew, I suspected, I became increasingly certain over time, and the plan was for me to die. And to come back, Dumbledore said with the careful precision of someone who knew the distinction mattered and was making it anyway. The Elder Wand, the Resurrection Stone, the Cloak, the Deathly Hallows together would give you mastery of death. You would survive. Probably, Harry said. Yes, Dumbledore said, probably. Harry sat with this for a moment. The weight of it, the elegance of it, actually, the long game of a brilliant mind building a structure around a prophecy, using a child as both the sacrifice and the weapon. He felt something complex about it that was not quite anger and not quite forgiveness, and was mostly just the clear-eyed acknowledgement of what it was. There's a piece of Voldemort's soul in my scar, Harry said, which means I need to deal with that, separately from dealing with Quirrell. If I destroy the Horcrux in my scar, his re-embodiment options narrow significantly, and whatever fragment is in Quirrell becomes the whole of what he has left. Dumbledore looked at him with something that was genuine surprise, carefully controlled. You know about Horcruxes. I read widely, Harry said. And the resonance of the dark anchors in this building told me enough to put it together. He looked at the Phoenix. It looked back with those deep eyes. I'm going to deal with Quirrell. Before the end of the school year, probably this week. He said it the way he said most things, as information being conveyed rather than permission being sought. I'm telling you because you should know, not because I need your approval. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment that had several layers to it. The layer of someone adjusting a decades-long plan, the layer of someone genuinely uncertain, the layer of someone meeting a person who was not what they'd prepared for and having to decide in real time what that meant. The stone, he said, will be safe, Harry said. What happens to it after is your decision, but it won't be used for Voldemort's return, I can promise that. Because I'll be the one holding it, Harry said simply. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. The Phoenix made a soft sound that wasn't quite a trill. Outside, the Scottish wind moved against the tower windows, and the portraits were doing the portrait thing of pretending not to listen while listening. The Horcrux in your scar, Dumbledore said finally. Do you have a method? Working on it, Harry said. The anchors in the building are mostly neutralized. The lakebed anchor is dormant. When Quirrell is dealt with and the stone is secured, the fragment in my scar will be the last tether he has in this school. At that point, I'll need a basilisk venom or something of equivalent destruction capability. Something that destroys the soul fragment without. He stopped. He'd been about to say without killing me, but the full implication of that was something he didn't want to put in Dumbledore's hands as leverage. Without collateral damage, he finished. Dumbledore looked at him with the blue eyes and the quiet weight of someone who had more information than they were currently sharing. There is a basilisk in this school, he said. Harry looked at him. In the Chamber of Secrets, Dumbledore said, below the school, it has been there for a very long time. I have not been able to locate the entrance, but you know it's there. I have known for 40 years, Dumbledore said, with the candor of someone disclosing something they're not proud of. I have been unable to locate it. The Founder's enchantments on that particular chamber are exceptional. Harry thought about the Foundation Stone's Annabeth had dated to 350 CE, about Salazar Slytherin's visits to the lake. About the language of Parseltongue that ran through certain bloodlines, including, if the whispers about his heritage that he'd never fully investigated were true, his own. About the chamber and what it would mean to have basilisk venom on hand for the Horcrux problem. "I'll find it," Harry said. After Quirrell, Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. "You're very certain of yourself," he said, not critically, not with the gentle challenge of an elder managing a young person's confidence, just an observation. "I'm certain of what I know and appropriately uncertain about what I don't," Harry said. "Quirrell I know, the stone I know. What happens after?" He met the blue eyes. "That part I'm working on, which is why I came to talk to you. You know things I don't about Voldemort's Horcruxes, how many, where they are. After this school year I'm going to need that information." "You're 11 years old," Dumbledore said. "I'm also Poseidon's son," Harry said. "I've been Poseidon's son longer than I've been 11. The silence that followed was different from the earlier silences, deeper. The kind that happens when two people have found the honest terms of a relationship that is going to be complicated and ongoing, and is more useful than either of the alternatives. Dumbledore said, "I will tell you everything I know about Tom Riddle's Horcruxes." "All of it," Harry said, "not the version edited for my age." "All of it," Dumbledore agreed, with the slight tightening around his eyes that was his version of a smile that wasn't performing anything. "After you deal with Quirrell." Harry stood up. "Then I'll be back by the end of the week," he said. "Harry," Dumbledore said as Harry reached the door. He turned. "Your mother," Dumbledore said. I think she would have been very difficult about all of this. In the best possible way." Harry held this. It was different from McGonagall's description, different angle, different relationship, different grief. "Thank you," he said, "for telling me." He went down the spiral stairs and out into the corridor and stood for a moment in the cold stone quiet of the castle at night, and let himself feel everything he'd been filing. Just for a moment, the weight of the Horcrux in his own skull, the plan Dumbledore had built around his death, the grief of parents he'd never known being described to him in pieces by people who had loved them. Then he filed it again. There was work to do, he told the others that evening. Not everything, not the full Horcrux revelation, not the Chamber of Secrets, not the piece of Voldemort's soul sitting behind his scar like a splinter in deep tissue. Those were his to sit with until he knew what to do with them. But the plan, the timeline, the roles, those he laid out in Hermione's room in Gryffindor Tower while Ron sat on the floor turning his chess knight over in his fingers and Annabeth stood at the window watching the grounds, and Neville sat on the edge of Hermione's desk with the focused expression he developed since Harry had started including him in things. "Thursday night," Harry said. "After midnight. Quirrell's been going every few nights. The pattern suggests he's building to something. 3 days from now aligns with the new moon, which minimizes light in the corridors and maximizes his window. He'll go Thursday." "How do you know his pattern?" Ron said. "I've been watching," Harry said. Ron looked at him for a moment with the kind of look that meant he had about 12 follow-up questions and had decided to trust Harry and not ask them. "The chess layer," Ron said. "I can do it. I've been thinking about the layout. A life-size chess set as a security measure would use standard defensive openings. There's a Queen's Gambit formation that gets most people across but sacrifices the knight." He paused. "I'd have to be the knight." "No," Neville said. Everyone looked at him. He was looking at Ron with the firm clarity of someone who had made a decision. "I'll be the knight," he said. "You need to be playing, Ron. You need to be at the board where you can see the whole game. I can take the hit." "Neville," Ron started. "I've been hit before," Neville said with the simple, grounded delivery of someone stating a fact about themselves that used to be a source of shame and has become just a fact. "I can take it. You're better at the game." Ron looked at him for a moment, then he looked at Harry. Harry looked back with nothing in his face except the steady acknowledgement that Neville had assessed himself correctly and made the right call. "Okay," Ron said quietly. "Yeah, okay," Hermione said. "The devil's snare, I'll go first." "I know the counter." She was already writing something. "The keys, Harry." "I'll handle the keys," Harry said. "You'll need a broom," Annabeth said from the window without turning. "The enchanted ones won't be locked. They're part of the chamber, part of the protection. You can use any of them." "I know which one to use," Harry said. "The dog," Hermione said. "Music, does anyone?" "Hagrid told me," Harry said. "A beat. He didn't realize he was telling me, but he told me." Hermione looked at him with the expression of someone deciding not to pursue that. "Annabeth," she said. "What's your role?" Annabeth turned from the window. She looked at Harry. "Yours," she said. "You come as far as the chess layer," Harry said. "You and Hermione manage the backtrack, make sure the path out stays clear, make sure no one follows us and who shouldn't. If something goes wrong on my end, Annabeth, you get everyone out. That's your job." "And who gets you out if something goes wrong?" Annabeth said. "Nothing will go wrong," Harry said. "Harry, if something does," he said with the patient tone of someone who has had this argument before and understands why it keeps recurring, "the mirror. Arist, if I'm in front of it and in trouble, the snitch is in my pocket and it opens. There's something in it Dumbledore put there. A stone." It'll handle the Horcrux piece and weaken Voldemort enough to end it. He held Annabeth's gaze. I'll be fine. You always say that, she said. I'm always right, he said. She looked at him for a long moment with the gray eyes and the full weight of 6 years of knowing him. Then she turned back to the window. Don't make me prove you wrong, she said. Thursday came the way important nights came, quietly, the castle doing nothing to acknowledge the significance, the usual rhythms of dormitories and dying fires and the soft breathing of people sleeping unaware. Harry had been awake since 11. He lay in his bed in the dark and listened to the castle and felt the lake below, the dormant anchor sitting quiet in the lakebed mud, the merpeople going about the night's business in the deep green dark, Silvmara probably awake too, aware that something was happening above. At midnight he got up. Cloak on, not his father's invisibility cloak, which he hadn't been given yet and which was currently in Dumbledore's keeping, but the Campishu concealment cloak Annabeth had brought, which worked differently, using shadow rather than magic, less elegant but functional, and went to the corridor outside the Gryffindor common room where the others were already assembled. They didn't talk. They moved. The third-floor corridor was empty, the locked door exactly as Harry had left it on every previous assessment, the wood humming faintly with the magic of what was on the other side. Behind it, 3 heartbeats. Harry put his hand on the door and the lock turned, not because he'd learned an unlocking charm, but because the door recognized something in his intention, the way things in this school had been recognizing him since September, responding to the authority of something older than Hogwarts' own enchantments. The door opened. The Cerberus was enormous. Even knowing it was there, even having felt its dimensions through the wood, the reality of it took up the space in the way that genuinely large things do, occupying not just physical space but attention, presence, the specific weight of something that had been built for a purpose and was very good at it. 3 heads, each one the size of a coffee table, and it woke immediately, all 3 sets of eyes snapping open with the focused aggression of a perfect guard dog. Harry reached into his pocket. He brought out the small, enchanted music box Hagrid had mentioned to him with the guileless enthusiasm of someone who loved his dog and wanted Harry to know exactly how to keep it happy, just in case. He opened it. Music. Simple, slow, the kind of melody that had no drama in it, just repetition and gentleness. The Cerberus's 3 heads moved toward the sound with the synchronized attention of something very large being made suddenly peaceful, and then slowly, with the tremendous weight of 300 stone of magical creature deciding to rest, it sat down and its eyes began to close. 30 seconds, all 3 heads down. Harry moved to the trapdoor in the floor, opened it. Looked down into the dark. Go, he said. They went, Hermione first, then Ron, then Neville, then Annabeth, who paused at the edge and looked at Harry with one last gray-eyed assessment. I'll be here, she said. I know, he said and dropped. The devil's snare was darkness and tendrils and the specific immediacy of something that responded to panic by becoming worse, which was elegant design if you thought about it, a filter for people who couldn't manage their fear. Hermione, said Lumos solemn before the plant had fully registered their presence, and the light bloomed wide and the tendrils recoiled and they landed on stone and kept moving. The keys were extraordinary, hundreds of them, all flying, filling the chamber with the constant metallic sound of wings, and Harry found the right broom without discussion and went up. Finding the key took 90 seconds, the one with the bent wing moving differently from the others, the specific chaos of something that had been used and repaired, and he took it out of the air and they went through the door and into the chess chamber. The chess set was life-size and waiting and looked like something carved from malevolence, the pieces tall and dark and carrying the specific energy of things enchanted to violence. Ron stood at the edge of it and went still in the way he went still when he was doing the 3-dimensional calculation he was exceptionally good at, his eyes moving across the board in the silence of total concentration. Right, he said finally. Harry, you're a bishop. Hermione, rook on the king's side. Neville. He looked at Neville. Neville looked back with the clear, calm face of someone who had already made their decision and was at peace with it. Knight, far side. You'll need to move into the path of their queen to open the diagonal. Tell me when, Neville said. The game was savage. The pieces moved with the full weight of enchanted stone and the specific brutality of a security system that had no interest in being gentle. Harry moved as directed, cutting diagonals with the efficiency of actual chess knowledge. Chiron had taught him, and Chiron had been playing since before the modern rules were standardized, so Harry's chess was thorough. Hermione played her rook with the focused precision she brought to everything. Ron played like someone hearing music that no one else could hear, fluid, instinctive, 1 move ahead and then 3 moves ahead, the board resolving itself around his decisions in the way that happened when someone truly gifted at something was doing that thing without interference. "Now, Neville," he said. Neville moved his knight forward. The opposing queen moved immediately, and the blow it delivered was enormous. Neville went down hard, the stone floor of the chamber shaking with it, and Harry was moving before the sound of it finished, crouching beside him. Neville was breathing, conscious barely, his face white and his eyes open. "Go," Neville said with the quiet insistence of someone who has paid a price on purpose and wants it to have been worth something. "He's all right," Ron said from the board, his voice tight but controlled, reading the situation the way he read the chess game, accurately and fast. "He'll be all right, Harry, it's clear." Harry squeezed Neville's shoulder once. He stood up. He looked at Hermione, who was looking at Neville with the specific expression of someone containing an emotion they'll process later, and she looked at Harry and nodded. "Go," she said. He went through the door alone. The troll chamber was empty. The troll unconscious against the far wall, already dealt with, the smell of it enormous and not worth dwelling on. The potions chamber beyond it was Snape's puzzle, exactly as Hermione had predicted, and the logic of it resolved in 2 passes through the clue. The smallest bottle going forward, the rounded bottle going back, and he swallowed the smallest one and felt the cold fire of it and stepped through. The final chamber. The mirror of Arist stood at the far end, tall and ornate and waiting, its surface dark from here, reflecting nothing but the torchlit air. Before it, with his back to Harry and his head turned to look at the reflection, Quirrell. Harry stopped walking. He assessed the room in the 3 seconds he had before Quirrell turned. One entrance, no exits except the door he'd come through, the mirror as focal point, nothing else except torches and cold stone. Quirrell between him and the mirror. Quirrell's posture carrying the specific tension of someone who had been staring at something they want desperately and cannot have. Quirrell turned. The stutter was completely gone. His face had dropped its classroom performance entirely, and without it there was something else, a sharpness that was partly Quirrell and partly something sharing the space behind his eyes. "Harry Potter," he said. "How convenient." "Quirrell," Harry said, same tone, same register. "You're alone," Quirrell said, and there was genuine surprise in it. The surprise of someone who had built their picture of Harry Potter from the stories and found the actual person kept failing to match. "I prefer it," Harry said, moving into the room, not toward Quirrell but angling, creating distance and diagonal simultaneously, the combat geometry coming as naturally as breathing. "How long have you been working for him?" "A year," Quirrell said. "You knew?" "I suspected in September," Harry said. "I was certain by October." He kept moving. "The stone isn't there, by the way. You can't get it from the mirror that way." Quirrell's eyes cut to the mirror and back. "You don't know, you want it for yourself and you can see yourself with it," Harry said. "That's not the same as wanting it to give away. The mirror shows you what you most desire. What you most desire is to give Voldemort his body back, which means you'd see yourself handing it over, which means," he tilted his head, "you've been standing here for 20 minutes and you haven't seen that, have you?" Quirrell's face moved through several things. "You're afraid of him," Harry said, gently, not cruelly, the observation of someone reading a person accurately. "You've been afraid of him since the beginning. That's not a weakness, Quirrell. It's just information. He inhabits your body and you're still afraid of him." He paused. "That must be exhausting." The voice that came out of Quirrell next was not Quirrell's. Deeper, drier, the specific timbre of something that had been fury and ambition and was now mostly will. "Enough," it said. "Come here, boy." Harry looked at the mirror. He walked toward it, past Quirrell, and Quirrell moved to block him, and Harry sidestepped with the automatic economy of someone trained to move past obstacles and arrived in front of the mirror. He looked. He saw himself, standing exactly where he was standing. And in the reflection his hand was extended, and in his hand was the stone, small, red, real. And then the reflection of himself closed its fist and pocketed it and looked directly out of the mirror at Harry with an expression that was calm and clear and certain. And Harry felt something in his pocket. He looked down. He reached in. His fingers closed around something warm and small and real. He pulled it out. The Philosopher's Stone, red as old blood, sitting in his palm like it had been waiting there all along. "Interesting," Harry said. Quirrell lunged. The lunge was fast. Quirrell was not a trained fighter, but Voldemort's presence gave him a borrowed power that made him something more than his body alone. And Harry took the grab on his left arm and felt the burning start immediately. The specific scorching pain of dark power meeting his skin. He let it happen for exactly 1 second, processing the sensation, noting the quality of it, the way it felt like the lakebed anchor had felt, but concentrated, focused, personal, and then he grabbed Quirrell's wrist with his right hand. The reaction was instantaneous and catastrophic for Quirrell. Harry had known it would be Dumbledore's theory, Lily's protection, the love magic in his blood that had no name in any academic text, but had a quality you could feel if you were paying attention. What he hadn't anticipated was the scale of it. The way the contact between his hand and Quirrell's skin created something that ran in both directions, Quirrell recoiling from the burning, the borrowed dark power inside him screaming, and simultaneously Voldemort's fragment twisting toward Harry's scar with the desperate momentum of two pieces of the same soul trying to rejoin across the barrier of living bodies. Harry held on. Not because it wasn't painful, it was. The scar burning with a white intensity that narrowed his vision and turned everything at the edges to static. He held on because letting go was the wrong move, because Quirrell was already failing, the body he'd given to Voldemort breaking down under the sustained contact with power that was antithetical to everything Voldemort was. He held on because the stone in his other hand was warm and present, and needed to stay exactly where it was. He held on because Annabeth had told him once, standing on a beach in Long Island at 9 years old, when you're sure of the outcome, the only variable is endurance, and he was sure of the outcome. Quirrell made a sound that had Voldemort's voice underneath it and his own voice on top of it, and was both of them at once, rage and agony and something that might have been relief. If relief was possible in that situation, the relief of a man who had been occupied by a tyrant and was finally being emptied of him. The dark figure that rose from Quirrell when he fell was thin as smoke and cold as the lake bed and screaming in a register that wasn't sound exactly, but existed in the space where sound and intent overlapped. It passed through Harry, through his chest, not around it, because there was something in him it was trying to reach, and what it was trying to reach was the fragment in his scar. Harry felt the pull of it, felt the scar light up with the joining attempt, felt for one terrible instant what it would be like to be the meeting point of a soul that had been split too many times and was trying desperately to gather itself. He reached into his pocket, not the stone, the coin. Arthur's coin, Atlantean bronze, old enough that the face on it was Poseidon's earliest known avatar, the one that predated the Olympian formalization, the one that was just the sea itself in a form that could be described. He'd carried it since he was 5 years old, and it was the most important object he owned, and he had known, in the way you know things that can't be explained, that it was going to matter tonight. He pressed it to his scar. The ocean answered, not metaphorically. The water in every pipe in Hogwarts castle sang simultaneously. A deep resonance felt rather than heard, the castle's plumbing responding to the pull of Poseidon's blood under genuine pressure. The lake outside moved, a deep pulse that Silvmara would feel and recognize. And the fragment of Voldemort in Harry's scar recoiled from the contact with something that was the opposite of dark in the most fundamental possible way. Not light, not the binary opposition of magic texts, but the specific and vast oldness of the ocean, which had been alive before the distinction between dark and light was invented and had no patience for either. The fragment came out. Not explosively, not with drama, with the suddenness of something being expelled, thin and shrieking, joining the smoke of Voldemort's passing shade and being carried with it as it fled the room. Fled the castle, fled toward whatever distant geography a disembodied and now significantly further diminished Dark Lord retreats to when his plan has failed completely. The scar on Harry's forehead stopped burning. The stone floor of the chamber was very cold. At some point, Harry had sat down on it, which he didn't fully remember deciding to do. He was still holding the stone. His left arm hurt, his head hurt, everything else was fine. The mirror reflected him sitting on the floor, and the Harry in the mirror was looking back at him with what might have been amusement, and the stone was not in the reflection because it was in Harry's hand. "Right," Harry said to the room and the mirror and the lingering cold. "Right." He sat there for a moment, let his breathing settle. Let the Poseidon's coin warm back to normal temperature in his hand and felt the lake responding below, not in words, but in the settled quality of something that had been braced for impact and felt the impact resolve. The lake bed anchor, Annabeth, had disconnected. The dungeon anchor, the same. And whatever had been in his scar was gone, expelled, carried out with the retreating fragment of a soul that had just lost its last toehold in the physical world. He was going to need to find the other Horcruxes. He and Dumbledore were going to have a long, unedited conversation about Tom Riddle, but that was later. Right now he sat on the floor of the mirror chamber and held a small red stone and breathed, and the castle breathed around him and the lake breathed below. He heard the door. Annabeth came in first, because of course she had come down when he'd been in here too long, because that was who she was, and she looked at Quirrell's crumbled form in the mirror and Harry on the floor and did the full rapid assessment. "You're hurt," she said. "My arm," he said. "It's not serious." She crossed the room and crouched beside him and looked at his arm and his face and the coin in his hand. She looked at his scar, faded now, the lightning bolt still there but quiet, no longer inflamed. "The Horcrux," she said. "Gone," he said. She let out a breath, just one. Then she sat down beside him on the cold floor, which was very much not standard Annabeth Chase behavior, and said everything about what she wasn't going to say out loud. Good, she said. Yeah, Harry said. I'm going to tell Chiron you were reckless. I wasn't reckless. You grabbed a Voldemort-possessed person's wrist with your bare hand, she said. Tactically sound decision, Harry said. The contact burns him. It was the fastest solution. It's lucky your skin is made of whatever your skin is made of. Poseidon's blessing, Harry said. See, touched, resistant to, I know what it is, she said. I helped you research it when we were 8. Harry looked at her. She was looking at the mirror, which was now reflecting both of them sitting on the floor of a chamber under a Scottish castle, and the reflection was accurate, and it was strange to see it accurately rather than distorted by desire. The mirror's interesting, Harry said. It shows you what you want most, Annabeth said. It showed me doing the right thing, Harry said, which means that's still what I want most, even here, even after all of this. He paused. I thought it might have changed. Annabeth looked at him sideways with the gray eyes. Why would it have changed? I've been here for months, Harry said. He thought about Hermione and Neville and Ron and the twins and McGonagall's careful pride and the lake and Silvmara and the merpeople and the strange, accumulated warmth of a place that kept surprising him. I've got things here, people, things worth wanting. You can want all of it, Annabeth said. That's not a contradiction. Harry looked at the mirror again. No, he said, I suppose it isn't. Hermione appeared in the doorway with Ron behind her, both of them taking in the scene, Quirrell's collapsed form, the mirror, Harry and Annabeth sitting on the floor with the complete equanimity of people who have been through something significant and have come out the other side of it. Neville, Harry said. He's all right, Hermione said, coming into the room with her eyes moving rapidly across everything. Concussion. He'll wake up in the hospital wing. I carried Ron and she stopped. She looked at Quirrell. She looked at Harry. Is it done? Harry held up the stone. It sat in his palm, small and red and ordinary looking, the way things that contained enormous power often looked, because the world had a sense of humor about that. It's done, he said. Ron let out a long breath. He looked around the chamber and at the mirror and at the stone and said, with the particular Weasley capacity for finding the human truth of a situation without overcomplicating it, were you lot just sitting on the floor? Brief debrief, Harry said. Right, Ron said. Fair enough. Hermione came and sat down on Harry's other side, which he had not expected, and didn't say anything, just sat there present the way she was present at breakfast with her books and her arguments and her completely reliable intelligence. It was, Harry thought, an excellent quality in a person. We should probably tell Dumbledore, she said after a moment. Tomorrow, Harry said. Harry, tomorrow, he said. Tonight I just need to sit here for a minute. Hermione looked at him. 5 minutes, she said, with the decisive tone of someone setting a timer. 5 minutes, he agreed. Annabeth on his left said nothing. The mirror reflected all 4 of them in the cold chamber, ordinary and extraordinary simultaneously, and didn't embellish. 5 minutes later, Harry stood up, pocketed the stone, and led them out. Chapter 6, King of Two Worlds. Dumbledore was already awake when Harry knocked. Not the conspicuous alertness of someone who had been warned or who had been watching through magical means, but the genuine, settled wakefulness of an old man who slept lightly and had learned not to fight it. He opened the office door in a dressing gown that was purple and entirely undignified, looked at Harry for a moment, looked at the 4 people behind him, and stepped aside. Come in, he said. I'll make tea. He made tea with a wand and no fuss, 5 cups appearing on the desk with the efficiency of someone who had hosted unexpected visitors at 3 in the morning more times than he could count. Harry put the stone on the desk. Dumbledore looked at it. He picked it up, turned it over once, set it back down with the careful deliberateness of someone handling something they had strong feelings about. Quirrell, he said. In the mirror chamber, Harry said. He's alive. He needs medical attention. His body took significant damage from the contact. Whatever Voldemort was using to inhabit him has left, so, he paused, choosing his words precisely. It'll be difficult for him. Coming back from that, but he has the option of coming back. Dumbledore nodded slowly. He looked at Harry's arm, at the scorching along the forearm from Quirrell's grip. He looked at Harry's scar, the lightning bolt quiet now, faded to something closer to a shadow than a wound. He looked at Harry with the blue eyes that were doing something complex and said nothing for a moment. Ron had found a biscuit somewhere. Hermione was looking at every object in the office with barely contained scholarly appetite. Annabeth was watching Dumbledore with the specific attention of someone building an intelligence file. The Horcrux, Dumbledore said. In your scar. Gone, Harry said. How? The coin. Harry put it on the desk beside the stone. Atlantean bronze, old enough to carry a direct imprint of Poseidon's nature. The fragment couldn't hold itself against it. He looked at the coin. It's not damaged, the coin. He picked it back up because it was his and he wanted it back. Dumbledore looked at the space where the coin had been. I have spent 30 years wondering how to address that particular problem, he said quietly. I had a plan. It required. He stopped. It required considerably more from you than a coin. I know what it required, Harry said. The room was quiet. Hermione and Ron exchanged a look. Annabeth kept watching Dumbledore. The other Horcruxes, Harry said. You promised me everything. Yes, Dumbledore said. He looked at the assembled group, at Hermione's expression of someone who has just had a term she didn't know become suddenly and urgently relevant, at Ron's expression of someone rapidly connecting things, at Annabeth's complete strategic stillness. He appeared to make a decision. All of you should hear this, he said. If Harry trusts you, then I trust his judgment, he told them. The full architecture of it, Tom Riddle's history, the deliberate construction of Horcruxes, the 6 objects besides the scar fragment, the diary, the ring, the locket, the cup, the diadem, Nagini. He laid it out methodically, with the specific grief of someone describing a tragedy they had watched develop over decades and had been unable to fully prevent. His voice was even and his eyes were not. Hermione wrote everything down. Ron went pale at the snake and didn't recover. Annabeth drew diagrams. Harry listened with the focused attention he brought to intelligence briefings, filing and cross-referencing, building the picture. When Dumbledore finished, he was quiet for a moment, thinking about timelines and logistics and the specific problem of destroying objects that had been made deliberately indestructible. The diary, he said. If Voldemort uses it this year, second year, it opens the Chamber of Secrets, which gives me access to basilisk venom. You would need to be a Parselmouth, Dumbledore said carefully. I speak it, Harry said. I didn't know I did until I tried it with the merpeople. Some of them use a dialect that overlaps. He thought about the lake, about the deep conversations with Sylvmara, about the moments when the language had shifted into something older, and he'd followed it instinctively. It comes from Poseidon, pre-Olympian, older than the Wizarding World's version of it. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment that had several layers. Remarkable, he said with the complete sincerity of someone who was genuinely and specifically finding something remarkable rather than using the word as social punctuation. I'll need a plan for each Horcrux, Harry said. Timeline, location, method. I want to move on all of them next year. He paused. And I'll need your full cooperation, not edited cooperation, not managed disclosure, everything. Dumbledore looked at him with the blue eyes and the weight of all the plans he'd been revising since this conversation started. You'll have it, he said. Good. Harry picked up the stone from the desk. What do you want to do with this? Dumbledore looked at it. Nicholas Flamel and his wife have lived beyond their natural span, he said. They knew when the stone was entrusted to me that its security meant eventual destruction. They are at peace with that outcome. You want to destroy it, Harry said. It cannot be allowed to remain as an object of desire, Dumbledore said. Not while Tom Riddle exists in any form. Harry turned the stone over in his fingers. He thought about what it represented, the intersection of alchemy and ambition and the very human refusal to accept mortality. He thought about Flamel, 200 years old, deciding that enough was enough. He thought about the stone sitting somewhere and calling to the wrong people for another decade. Then we destroy it now, Harry said, before I leave this office. Dumbledore looked at him. You're cert. Are you cert? Harry said, a long pause. Then Dumbledore reached into his desk and brought out something that looked like a hammer but was clearly much more than a hammer, old, ruined, the specific weight of something that had been made for a precise and final purpose. Nicholas gave me this, he said. Some years ago, he knew it would be needed eventually. Harry set the stone on the desk. Dumbledore brought the hammer down. The sound it made was not loud. It was the opposite of loud, a deep, resonant absence of sound, a compression, and then the stone was fragments and the fragments were dust, and the dust was the quality of something that was entirely done existing. The warmth that had been in it, the alchemical warmth of something that had been alive in the way objects could be alive, was simply gone. Ron said very quietly, Blimey. Yes, Dumbledore agreed. He looked at the dust for a moment. Then he swept it with his wand into a small stone bowl and set it aside. I'll write to Nicholas in the morning. They left the office as the castle clock struck 4. In the corridor heading back toward Gryffindor Tower, Annabeth walked beside Harry and said nothing for long enough that Harry looked at her. He's going to be all right, she said, about Dumbledore. I think so, Harry said. He's adjusting. It's a significant adjustment. He built 30 years of plans around a version of you that doesn't exist, she said. That's a lot of scaffolding to take down. He's taking it down, Harry said. That's what matters. Annabeth nodded. She looked at the corridor ceiling the way she looked at ceilings when she was cataloging architecture. This is a beautiful school, she said, almost grudgingly. Structurally. The way the enchantments are load-bearing, they're integrated into the building's integrity. It's extraordinary design. Don't let Hermione hear you say that, Harry said. You'll be here until June. I might be here until June anyway, Annabeth said. Chiron's been in contact with some people here about a formal exchange arrangement. She paused. Camp in Hogwarts, not a full alliance, just recognition, knowledge sharing. Harry looked at her. You've been having a separate conversation this whole time. I'm always having a separate conversation, she said. You know this about me. What kind of knowledge sharing? Monster classification, mostly. Your wizarding world has been categorizing creatures that our world has entirely different intelligence on, and vice versa. The overlap is significant, and in some cases your people have been dealing with things the wrong way because they're working from incomplete information. She paused. Also, your divination curriculum is Harry. It's embarrassing. I know, Harry said. The oracle system we use is not perfect, but it's considerably more honest than. I know, Harry said. You should tell Dumbledore that. I will, she said, with the certainty of someone who had already scheduled this in her head. Tomorrow, after I sleep. They reached the Gryffindor common room. Hermione went straight to her dormitory with the focused quiet of someone who was going to process everything she'd heard tonight in organized silence. Ron paused at the foot of the boys' staircase and looked at Harry with the uncomplicated directness that was one of Ron's best qualities. Harry, he said. Yeah, is any of this? He stopped, started again. The demigod thing, the son of Poseidon thing, is that why you're? He made a gesture that seemed to encompass Harry's entire existence. Mostly, Harry said. Ron nodded. He processed this for a moment with the three-dimensional thinking he applied to chess applied now to the revised map of who his friend was. Right, he said. Does that make you, are you still another stop? Still what? Still Harry, Ron said with the genuine uncertainty of someone asking a real question. Harry looked at him, at the red hair and the honest face and the specific Weasley quality of meaning exactly what you said. Yeah, he said, I'm still Harry. Ron nodded, satisfied in the way of someone who needed one piece of information and has received it. Good, he said. Night then. Night, Harry said. Ron went upstairs. Annabeth had already found the guest room McGonagall had authorized for her and was presumably asleep by now, because Annabeth was nothing if not efficient. Harry sat in the Gryffindor common room for a while in the dying firelight, alone, and let the night settle around him. The end-of-year feast happened on a Thursday, which felt to Harry like a slightly arbitrary day for a culmination, but Hogwarts operated on its own logic, and he'd made his peace with that. The Great Hall was full and warm, and the enchanted ceiling was doing the June evening justice. Long light, the sky that particular shade of early summer blue that existed nowhere else except Scotland and possibly certain parts of the Greek islands. The house points had been tallied, and Slytherin was ahead. Dumbledore stood and added points with the measured generosity of someone who had done the arithmetic beforehand and was enjoying the theater of it. 10 to Ron for chess, 10 to Hermione for the logic puzzle, 50 to Neville for courage, and 60 to Harry, which Dumbledore announced for services to the school that the circumstances did not yet make it appropriate to detail. And Gryffindor won the House Cup by the margin of a very eventful year. The Slytherin table's green decorations were replaced by red and gold banners in a display of magical stagecraft that Harry admired for its efficiency. The feast appeared. The noise levels of several hundred teenagers discovering they'd won something made the castle vibrate pleasantly. Neville, sitting beside Harry, had been out of the hospital wing for 3 days, and was eating with the appetite of someone who had been unconscious for 30 hours and had significant nutritional arrears to address. His arm was still in a sling. The chess queen's blow had cracked 2 ribs as well as the concussion, and Madame Pomfrey had been unambiguous about the timeline for healing. But he was here, and he was eating, and he'd received the news of his 10 house points with an expression that Harry was going to remember for a long time. You should have got more, Harry told him. 10's plenty, Neville said with the genuine contentment of someone who has recalibrated their baseline. It's not about the amount, Harry said. It's about what it was for. Courage is the hardest one. Chess is solvable. Logic is solvable. Courage isn't solvable. It just is or it isn't. Neville looked at him. You could have said nothing, he said. I could have, Harry agreed. But then you wouldn't know that I think you were the most important person in that chamber. Neville went red to his ears, which he did when sincerely complimented rather than performed at, and ate a large amount of roast chicken in emotional recovery. Hermione, on Harry's other side, was in conversation with Annabeth across the table. They'd found each other on the second day of Annabeth's visit, and had proceeded to have the kind of intense, rapid-fire intellectual relationship that happened when 2 extremely organized thinkers discovered they were using different but compatible organizational systems. The conversation appeared to be about the flaws in the standard Hogwarts library's cross-referencing methodology, which both of them found genuinely upsetting. Ron was eating and watching the twins do something to the Slytherin table from a distance with the fond, evaluative expression of a connoisseur. That's elegant, he said. They shouldn't, but that's elegant. They absolutely shouldn't, Harry said. It's elegant. Fred and George arrived at Harry's shoulder approximately 30 seconds later, which was the amount of time required to get from the site of a minor enchantment to a plausible alibi location. Lovely evening, Fred said. Wonderful feast, George said. Something just happened at the Slytherin table, Harry said. Several things happen at the Slytherin table regularly, Fred said. It's a table of incidents. Their pudding turned blue, Ron said. That does sound like an incident, George agreed. Harry looked at them both with the specific expression he reserved for situations where he was choosing not to pursue something. They grinned with the complete comfort of people who have been accurately assessed and have no objections. Across the hall, at the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy was eating with the composed equanimity of someone who had decided that a blue pudding was beneath his notice. His eyes moved briefly to Harry, not the assessing flicker of early October, not the carefully managed neutrality of November. Something else. Something that was an acknowledgement, quiet, stripped of performance, the specific expression of someone who had made a choice and was living with it. Harry raised his goblet slightly. Malfoy looked at his plate, which was, Harry thought, about right for where they were. The last dive happened at 5 in the morning on the day of departure, before the castle was moving, before the carriages had been arranged, in the specific soft dark of a Scottish June morning. It was more dark blue than black and smelled like grass and cold water and the beginning of something. Harry walked to the lake's edge and stood there for a moment, looking at the water. The black lake gave back the morning sky in near-perfect reflection, the castle reversed above it, the hills upside down at the margins, the whole world doubled and calm. He could feel the depth of it from here, the full 70 feet to the lake bed where Sylvmara was probably already awake, where the Grindylows were doing whatever Grindylows did in the early morning, where the anchor point in the southeast quadrant sat cold and dead in the mud, disconnected, neutralized, waiting for him to decide what to do with it permanently. He took off his shoes. He took off his outer robe. He walked in. The lake received him the way it always did, the circle of stillness spreading from his entry point, the temperature irrelevant, the water closing over his head with the specific welcome of home. He went down. He let himself drop through the green dark, past the zone of light and into the proper deep, past the weed forests and the silver flash of fish and the slow circling bulk of the giant squid, acknowledging his passage with a gesture he'd learned to read as roughly good morning. Sylvmara was at the edge of her settlement, waiting. He hadn't told her he was coming. He hadn't needed to. She looked at him for a moment with the yellow eyes and the scarred jaw and the full weight of someone who had been waiting for a king for a very long time and had finally got one. He looked back. The water between them was warm. You're going, she said. For the summer, he said. I'll come back in September. The dark thing is gone. Yes, the lakebed anchor. I'll deal with it properly when I return, he said. Do you have something that can contain it until then? Something that prevents it interacting with anything? She turned and made a gesture to one of the younger merpeople nearby, who disappeared into the settlement and came back with a sealed stone container, old, carved with markings Harry recognized as pre-Hogwarts, possibly the same era as the foundation stones Annabeth had dated. She handed it to him. He swam to the anchor, assessed it one more time, severed it from the lake bed with a clean directed pulse that left nothing behind except the mark of where it had been, and placed it in the container. Sealed it, handed it back. We will keep it, Sylvmara said. Thank you, Harry said. Then in the formal register that meant he was speaking as king rather than as a person who happened to be there. I recognize the sovereignty of this lake and the community that inhabits it. I recognize the pacts made with the school's founders as binding and overdue for renegotiation in your favor. I will speak to the school's leadership about restoring your treaty rights to the level they were originally written. He paused. That includes no unauthorized entry into the lake by students or staff. No use of the lake as a tournament venue without the community's explicit consent and participation as equals, not set dressing. And quarterly consultation with the headmaster's office conducted in this lake in your language. The water went very warm. Sylvmara looked at him for a long moment with an expression that he could now read accurately. After a year of learning the specific emotional vocabulary of her face, it was the expression of someone who had been patient for a very long time and had just been told the patience was over. The lake thanks its king, she said. The king thanks his lake, he said. He turned and swam up. He broke the surface in the blue morning air and stood in the shallows for a moment, the castle above him fully lit now, the first carriages being loaded on the far side of the grounds, the sounds of a school concluding itself reaching him faintly across the water. The giant squid surfaced beside him, not dramatically, not with the full reveal of its considerable mass, just one long arm breaking the surface and resting on the water beside Harry's leg with the comfortable familiarity of a creature that had made a decision about this person and was at peace with it. Harry put his hand on the arm. I'll be back, he said. The arm slid back under the water. He walked out of the lake, dried by the time he reached his shoes, and looked at the castle one last time before he turned toward it. Hogwarts in the morning light, improbable and massive and full of things worth coming back to. He thought about the year he'd had. the lake and the merpeople and Sylvmara's formal recognition, the chest chamber and Neville going down and getting back up, Annabeth sitting on a cold floor beside him without needing to explain why, Hermione arguing about books and being right often enough to be genuinely useful, Ron playing chess in a way that was almost a kind of prophecy, Dumbledore adjusting his plans with the specific grinding dignity of a very intelligent person who has been wrong. McGonagall and her precise pride, the twins being disasters with a high degree of competence, Draco Malfoy in a side corridor telling the truth quietly and then pretending he hadn't. He thought about the scar on his forehead, still there, still a lightning bolt, but quiet now, a scar rather than a live wound, and what it meant that it was quiet. He picked up his shoes and went inside. The conversation with Dumbledore happened at 9 in the morning, in the headmaster's office with T and the Phoenix watching and the portraits pretending. Dumbledore had a roll of parchment on his desk. Notes Harry could tell from the density of the writing, the thorough kind that meant he'd been up early thinking. Tom Riddle's diary, Harry said, sitting down, will appear next year. I know the entry point. Lucius Malfoy will place it in a student's cauldron at Flourish and Blots. His son told me enough that I can predict the mechanism. He looked at Dumbledore. I need to intercept it before it reaches a student. You're proposing to take it, Dumbledore said. I'm proposing to take it, use it to access the chamber, deal with the basilisk on terms that don't involve anyone dying, extract the venom in sufficient quantity to destroy the other Horcruxes, and then destroy the diary. He paused. The basilisk is the asset, not the threat. It's been down there for 1,000 years and has a right to be dealt with respectfully. Dumbledore looked at him with something that was becoming his characteristic expression in Harry's presence, the look of someone whose map of the territory keeps being revised by the territory's actual behavior. Respectfully, he said. It was put there by Salazar Slytherin, Harry said. It's been alone for 1,000 years guarding a chamber that no one was meant to access. That's a long post with no relief. I'm going to address that. By killing it, Dumbledore said carefully. By talking to it first, Harry said, in Parseltongue, finding out if there's an alternative. If there isn't, he paused. Then yes, but not without the conversation. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Then he said, you continue to find approaches I hadn't anticipated. That's because you were anticipating a different person, Harry said without unkindness. You anticipated someone who needed to be guided toward the right choices. I already know what the right choices are. I just need your information to execute them. Dumbledore held his gaze. And if our assessments of the right choices diverge, we'll argue, Harry said. I'll listen to your reasoning. You'll listen to mine. He met the blue eyes. You're the most knowledgeable person about Voldemort's history that I have access to. I'm not going to ignore that because I find some of your methods problematic. That would be stupid. And the methods you find problematic. Building a plan around a child's death without telling the child, Harry said. Using people as pieces. He said it without heat, the way he said most hard things, clearly, plainly looking at the person he was saying it to. I understand why. The logic is coherent, but it's not how I operate, and it's not how I'll allow the people around me to be operated with. If we're working together, I need to know what you're planning. All of it. That is, Dumbledore said slowly, a significant requirement. Yes, Harry said, it is. Another long pause. The Phoenix made a sound. The portraits shuffled. Outside, the carriages were moving on the grounds, the school's departure beginning in earnest. Somewhere below, Hermione was probably conducting one last library audit. Very well, Dumbledore said, complete transparency to the degree that my own knowledge extends. Thank you, Harry said. May I ask something in return? Yes, the ocean, Dumbledore said, your connection to it, the way the castle responds to you, the plumbing, the lake, the stone itself in places. Is it growing? Harry thought about last night, the moment he'd pressed the coin to his scar and the whole castle had resonated. Yes, he said. Is that something you're managing consciously? Increasingly, Harry said. At the start of the year I was managing reactively. Now it's more directional. I can feel the whole water system of the castle. I know when there's a pipe blocked in the 7th floor. I know when the lake is agitated. I know. He stopped. I can feel the water in people's bodies a little, not control it, just feel it. He looked at Dumbledore. That's new. Dumbledore looked at him with deep attention. Son of Poseidon, raised in Atlantis, now claiming sovereignty over a body of water that is itself ancient and powerful, he said. I imagine that's considerably stronger than it would be for a typical child of the sea god. Arthur said something similar, Harry said. When he called, he said the longer I was here the more the lake would anchor me, that it amplifies. He paused. He also said to be careful with it, that water near stone and power and age concentrates things. Wise counsel, Dumbledore said. He's usually right, Harry said. He found them in the entrance hall, Hermione with both her trunks organized with color-coded rope, Ron carrying something that seemed to be leaking, the twins with expressions of pure contentment that suggested they'd spent the last hour productively by their standards. Neville was attempting to contain Trevor, who had made his seasonal determination to escape and was doing so with conviction. Harry caught Trevor one-handed as he made a break for the door, looked him in the eye, and said something very quiet in a language that was not English and not quite anything Neville recognized. Trevor went entirely still. Harry handed him back. Neville looked at the toad. The toad sat in his hands with the composure of a different animal. "What did you say to him?" "That the castle grounds are dangerous for frogs," Harry said, "and that you need him specifically." Neville looked at the toad. Did he understand?" "Well enough," Harry said. Fred appeared at his shoulder. "You can talk to frogs." "I can talk to things that live in or near water," Harry said. "Trevor is amphibious, it's approximate." "Our school years just got significantly more interesting," Fred told George. "They were already interesting," George said. "More interesting than that," Fred said. "Can you talk to fish? We've been trying to work out the enchanted fish in the Great Hall ceiling for 3 years. "Those aren't real fish," Harry said. Fred and George both looked up at the ceiling with the expression of people who have just had a foundational assumption destabilized. "What?" Fred said. "They're projections," Harry said. "The whole ceiling is an enchantment keyed to the real sky. The fish are decorative." "We've been trying to communicate with decorative fish," George said. "For 3 years," Fred confirmed in the tone of someone conducting a serious internal audit. Harry picked up his trunk. "All right," he said to the group at large, to Ron, who gave him the loose-wristed wave of someone entirely comfortable, to the twins, who gave matching theatrical salutes, to Neville, who said please do with the sincerity of someone for whom the written word was a real connection, to Annabeth, who was standing slightly apart with the posture of someone who had already said what needed to be said, and was waiting for the logistical portion of the morning to begin. He looked at Hermione last. She was looking at him with the expression she deployed when something had affected her more than she was planning to show, which was an expression he'd come to know very well over the course of a year of daily proximity. She was holding her smallest bag with both hands and her chin was up, and she said, "I'll be in touch," with the complete certainty of someone who meant it. "I know you will," Harry said. "I've compiled notes," she said, "on everything this year, cross-referenced. I'll send the relevant sections." "I'd like that," Harry said, and meant it completely. She nodded. "Precise, efficient, containing something. Have a good summer, Harry," she said. "You too, Hermione," he said. They went out into the Scottish morning and onto the carriages, and the carriages moved, and Hogwarts shrank behind them in the way that large and important things shrank when you left them, not diminishing but concentrating, distilling itself into the shape of something you carry with you. On the Hogwarts Express, Harry had a compartment to himself for the first 20 minutes, which was exactly the amount of time he needed. He sat with Arthur's coin in his palm and thought about the year, not in summary but in the specific texture of it, the individual moments that had accumulated into something he hadn't anticipated when he'd walked onto the platform at September with a trunk and an owl, and the settled certainty of someone who had always known who they were. He still knew who he was. That part hadn't changed. But the knowing had expanded the way maps expand when you actually walk the territory, more detail, more specificity, more of the kind of knowledge that can only be gotten by being somewhere rather than reading about it. He was Harry Potter, son of Poseidon, raised in Atlantis and at Camp Half-Blood, and he was also the person who had spent a year in a Scottish castle learning the particular weight of a place that was also his by right of birth. Both were true simultaneously, and neither was the more important truth. He thought about the Horcruxes, 6 objects, some known, some suspected, all needing to be found and destroyed in a sequence that minimized the risk to everyone involved. He thought about the diary and Lucius Malfoy and the approach he'd already planned. He thought about the Chamber of Secrets beneath the school and a basilisk that had been alone for 1,000 years, and whether a parcel-tongue conversation could be the beginning of something more than a fight. He thought about Voldemort. Not in fear, he was incapable of that particular flavor of fear about a disembodied entity that had just been driven out of a school by a coin, but in the focused way of someone who respected an opponent's capabilities and was planning accordingly. Voldemort was patient, intelligent, and desperately motivated. He had lost his foothold and his instrument and the piece of himself that had been lodged in Harry's scar, and none of that would slow him for long. He would find another path, another body, another plan. Harry would be ready. The compartment door slid open. Hermione and Neville came in, Hermione with her organized stack of books and Neville with Trevor now installed in a container that appeared to be escape-proof on some new principle. Ron followed, carrying a large bag that was definitely not leaking anymore, which suggested he'd dealt with it and was choosing not to discuss how. They settled in the way they settled now, comfortable, instinctive, the spatial arrangements of people who had spent a year learning each other's preferences. Hermione by the window, books immediately out. Neville across from her with the peaceful expression of someone going home to something good. Ron diagonal to Harry, pulling out a chess set that was almost certainly not the same one he'd been given at Christmas because that one had opinions about its own safety. Harry put Arthur's coin in his pocket. He looked out the window at the Scottish countryside moving past, the hills rolling back, the heather going through all its colors in the morning light, a river catching the sun in long silver flashes as they crossed a bridge. The ocean was ahead. He could feel it even here, the distant pull of it through the water table and the river systems and the fundamental geological fact of an island. It was calling the way it had always called, before Hogwarts and after it, the oldest constant in his life. He let himself feel it and then let it settle to background. Because the compartment was warm and Ron was already setting up the chess pieces with the commentary of someone who had thoughts about the opening position. And Hermione had found whatever she was looking for in her books and made a small decisive sound. And Neville was talking to Trevor in the gentle, fond way of someone who has decided their toad understands more than people give it credit for. And Harry was here in this compartment. With these people going home, white or black, Ron said, meaning chess. Black, Harry said. Bold choice, Ron said, moving his king's pawn forward. Predictable opening, though. Watch the board, Harry said. Ron watched the board. His expression shifted into the focused clarity of genuine engagement. He said. Yeah, Harry said. Hermione turned a page. The train moved through the highlands. Outside, somewhere below the earth, river water ran toward the sea in the direction Harry was going. And the sea was waiting with the patience of something that had been waiting since before any of this was invented, and would still be waiting after all of it was resolved. Harry Potter, son of Poseidon, king of the Black Lake, late of Camp Half-Blood in Atlantis and one very eventful year at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, played chess on a moving train and watched Ron's expression as the strategy became clear and let himself be just for a few hours simply where he was. The letter to Arthur was already written, folded in his breast pocket, addressed to a cottage on the Devon coast. It said, Year 1 done. Voldemort is running. The lake has a king. I have people worth having, coming home first, then back. Harry P.S. You were right about the coin. He'd send it when they reached London. Arthur would read it on the cliff above the sea, probably, because that was where he read things that mattered. And he would fold it up and put it in the pocket that held Harry's other letters, and he would say nothing to anyone and feel everything he felt. The train ran south through the last of the highlands, and ahead of it, still hours away but getting closer, was the city and the platform and the barrier between worlds, between the one where trains ran on schedule and people drank too milky tea and argued about books, and the one where the ocean remembered everything and the water answered when you called. Harry lived in both. Both were his. Both were home.